Act 4, What we build in the light, in which the hidden becomes present, and the present becomes home. Chapter 31, The first morning of the new year. Konoha greeted the new year the way it greeted most things, with a mixture of ceremony and practicality that was entirely its own. There were the formal observances, the ones that had been conducted in the same order and at the same hours since the village's founding, the offerings at the old shrine near the monument, the lighting of the ceremonial fire in the central square, the reading of the names of those who had fallen in the preceding year. Carried out by the Hokage in the gray pre-dawn silence while the village was still finding its morning and the cold was at its sharpest. Naruto had done this for 4 years now. He had learned, in the first year, that it was one of the hardest things the Hokage's calendar required, not because the ceremony was elaborate but because the names were real. He had known many of them. He knew the families of most of them. The reading was not a ritual abstraction. It was a specific, uncompromising truth delivered in the coldest hour, and you had to be fully present for it, fully open to it, and then, when it was over, you had to be the Hokage for the rest of the day. He had also learned, by the second year, that the hour immediately after the ceremony, the one in which the village was coming to life and the formal obligations had not yet resumed, was one he needed to spend carefully. He spent it, this year, at Yoshino's kitchen table. She had not invited him. He had not announced he was coming. He had finished the ceremony and walked through the cold pre-dawn streets with the names still in his chest and arrived at the Records Hall district, and turned left instead of right, and found himself at her door, and knocked. She had answered in her morning clothes, which was the first time he had seen her in anything other than her working presentation, and her expression when she saw him had done something very brief and very specific, a recognition of what the morning required that did not need explanation. "Come in," she had said. "I will make tea." He sat at her kitchen table, and she made tea and set out a plate of the dense sesame rice cakes that were a Nara household tradition for the New Year morning, and she sat across from him and did not ask him to describe anything or process anything or be anything other than present. They drank tea in the quiet of the New Year's first morning. After a while she said, without preamble, "The names this year. How many did you know personally?" 4, he said. "Last year? 7. He looked at his tea. "The year before was 11, which was the closest to the war in count. I think that is why the number matters to me. It is going down. The distance from the war is in the number, and going down means something. It means the village is getting further from that," he said. "From what caused the number to be what it was. Every year the distance grows. But the 4 this year are not less real than the 11. "No," he said. "They are not less real at all." She refilled his tea without asking. She set the pot back on the trivet with the small, precise economy of someone who manages a household in the way they manage everything, without waste or unnecessary motion. "Shikamaru read the names when he was young," she said, and her voice was measured, at the ceremony for his father's cohort. "He was 14. I stood beside him and I did not hold his hand because he would not have wanted that, because he needed to stand in it alone in order to know that he could." A pause. "I stood close enough that he could feel I was there." Naruto looked at her. "You are very good at that," he said. "Standing close enough." She held his gaze for a moment. Something in her expression was very clear and without defense. "You should eat something," she said. "The sesame cakes are better warm." He ate. The kitchen was warm and smelled of tea and sesame, and the cold that had followed him in from the street, and was slowly leaving. Outside, the new year was arriving in its full light, and the village was waking into it, and the names were still in his chest in the way that the names of the gone always stay, not as weight exactly but as presence, as the specific gravity of what was real and had mattered, and he sat at Yoshino Nara's kitchen table with his tea and felt the particular, aching privilege of being the person who carried them. Chapter 32, Mikoto and the Uchiha Archive. The Uchiha clan archive had been sealed after the massacre. This was the correct administrative decision at the time, made by people who were doing their best in the aftermath of something that had no precedent, and that the village's governance structures had not been built to handle. The sealing had been intended as temporary, a holding measure until the situation could be assessed and appropriate decisions made about what to do with records that belonged to a clan that was no longer present. Temporary had lasted 16 years. Naruto had known about the archive for a long time, the way he knew about many things in the village's institutional memory, as a fact that lived in the background of his understanding without having been fully engaged. When he became Hokage, the archive had appeared in his first comprehensive briefing on sealed and restricted records, noted with the particular bureaucratic neutrality that official documents use for things that were in fact not neutral at all. He had been thinking about it since Mikoto had arrived in Konoha. He had not raised it with her because raising it required being certain that raising it was the right thing, that the offer he was considering making would be what she needed rather than what would cause harm. And he had spent a year learning who she was well enough to make that determination with any confidence. He raised it in February, on a morning when the cold had settled in fully and the village was in its deep winter configuration and the records hall district was quiet enough to hear the ice on the puddles crack underfoot. He found her in her usual late morning location, which was the small reading room adjacent to the main archive floor that she had gradually claimed as her working space over the course of the previous year, the room that Yoshino had unofficially designated as available for her use with the characteristically Yoshino combination of practicality and generosity. "There is something I want to talk to you about," he said, setting down the tea he had brought and sitting across from her. He had learned to lead with the subject rather than around it when it was something that mattered. She preferred that. She set down the document she was reading. "The Uchiha clan archive," he said. "It has been sealed since the massacre. I want to open it. I want to have it properly catalogued and made accessible. And I want you to be involved in that process, if you are willing, because you are the person best positioned to make decisions about what is in it." Mikoto was very still. He watched her face, which did not become readable all at once but changed in layers, the outermost composure first, and then beneath that something more complex, and beneath that something that was simply the unmediated reality of what he had just offered. "How long have you been considering this?" she asked. "Since shortly after you arrived," he said. "I waited because I wanted to know you well enough to understand whether this was what you needed or whether it would cause more damage than good. I do not believe it will cause damage. I think," he paused, choosing words carefully, "that the archive is yours. That the records in it belong to the people they record. And that you are here and the archive is here and continuing to keep them separated is not neutrality. It is a choice with consequences." She looked at him for a long time. "You have thought about this very carefully," she said. "Yes. It will not be simple," she said. "What is in there?" "The records of a clan that was wronged in ways that the village has not yet fully accounted for. Opening the archive is also opening that accounting." "I know," he said. "I am prepared for that. Are you prepared for what you may find that implicates decisions made before you were Hokage? Decisions made by people you respected?" He met her eyes. "Yes." She looked at him for another long moment. "I will be involved," she said. "Not as a courtesy to me. As a necessity. The archive cannot be correctly catalogued by someone who does not know what they are looking at." "Agreed. And the accounting you mentioned," she said, and her voice had taken on the particular quality it had when she was being most herself, most fully and entirely Mikoto Uchiha, without any softening or management. "That accounting will be honest. If the records show what I believe they show, the village's understanding of what happened will have to change. That is the point," he said. She looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked at him. "The archive," she said. "When do we begin?" "Next week," he said. "I want to give you time to prepare for it, whatever preparation looks like for you." She nodded once, with the full, deliberate finality of someone making a decision they have been waiting a long time to make. "Thank you," she said, and the words were compressed and precise and entirely genuine, the way Mikoto's gratitude always was, direct as a blade and no less valuable for it. "The archive is yours," he said again. "I am just opening the door." Outside the records hall, the winter held the village in its cold and clear grip, and inside the reading room 2 people sat with the weight of a history that was about to become present again, and neither of them looked away from it. Chapter 33, Sum's Daughter and the Morning Run. Hana Inuzuka ran the Eastern Circuit most mornings at 6, a route that covered 12 kilometers of the training district's outer perimeter, and the civilian market district's northern edge, and she ran it at a pace that was not casual. She had inherited her mother's relationship with physical training, which was the relationship of someone who understood that the body was a tool and that tools required maintenance, and that maintenance was not optional. She had not expected, on a Wednesday in February, to find the Hokage running the same route. She had heard from her mother that he had been coming to the Inuzuka training grounds regularly since the joint exercise in autumn, observing sessions and occasionally participating in building the kind of specific familiarity with clan practice that went beyond what any briefing document could provide. She had heard this with the slight wariness she brought to most things involving people she had not yet assessed herself, the trained caution of a veterinary medic who had learned that second-hand reports, however reliable the source, were not the same as first-hand observation. She was at kilometer 4 when she heard footsteps behind her that matched her pace exactly, which was not something most runners could do without effort. She glanced back. He was running with the same economical efficiency she had noted in serious athletes, nothing wasted, which was not what she had expected from someone whose primary reputation was for the dramatic and the large scale. She adjusted her assessment. She had a good opinion of people who ran honestly. Hana-san, he said, drawing level with her. Hokage-sama, she replied, and her tone was neutral in the specific way of someone who has not yet formed a view and is not going to perform one before they have. They ran in parallel for a while. The morning was cold and the route was clear, and the sound of their feet was even. Your mother mentioned you run this circuit, he said. She mentioned you observe training, Hana said. I try to understand what I am responsible for by seeing it rather than reading about it. That is an unusual approach for someone at your level of administration. Most people at my level have learned to receive reports, he agreed. I find reports lose something in translation. She ran with this for a moment. What do they lose? The texture. The way things actually feel to the people inside them. You can read that a training exercise has integration gaps. It is harder to read what the gap feels like from inside it, which is the information you need to fix it correctly. She was quiet for a kilometer. The pre-exercise vocabulary protocol, she said. The one you drafted and sent to my mother. Yes. I reviewed it. She did not say this as flattery or as criticism. She said it as a statement of fact that was building towards something. The first version had 7 terms. You revised to 5. Your mother said the Inuzuka threshold was 10 words. 5 terms felt more likely to actually be used. It is. The 5-term version is the right version. She paused. How did you know to cut the unnecessary ones rather than simplify them? Because simplifying them would have changed the precision. The 2 you lose are less important than the 5 you keep, and a shorter list gets used. A longer list gets set aside. She ran with this assessment for another kilometer. She was running a diagnosis on him the way she ran diagnoses on patients, systematically, looking for the gap between presentation and reality. She was not finding a gap. My mother trusts you, she said, at kilometer 7. She does not trust easily. I know. You have earned it correctly, she said. Not by impressing her. By showing up consistently and doing the work without making it about you. She glanced at him. That is how she respects people. That is the only way she respects people. It is a reasonable standard, he said. Most people find it frustrating. Most people want credit faster than the work earns it. She was quiet for the rest of the circuit. At the end, at the equipment shelter where serious runners marked their finish, she stopped and turned to look at him properly for the first time, the full direct assessment that was the Inuzuka family's preferred mode of evaluation. He stood in it without adjustment. Good run, she said, which was the Inuzuka compliment that required no translation. Same time Thursday? He asked. She considered. Wednesday and Thursday, she said. The circuit changes on Thursdays. More elevation. Good, he said. She walked toward the training compound. Halfway there she stopped and looked back. The pre-exercise vocabulary, she said. We tested it last week. 0 communication failures in the first 3 joint exchanges. He did not celebrate this. He simply received it the way good news should be received when it is the result of work, as confirmation rather than surprise. Good, he said. She turned and walked on, and behind her the morning expanded into its full winter light, cold and clear and entirely honest. Chapter 34. The Uchiha Archive, First Day. The archive room was in the lower level of the Administrative Records Building, Behind a door that had been sealed with a standard administrative lock that had, over 16 years, accumulated the particular quality of things that have been undisturbed for too long. The seal released cleanly when Naruto applied his authorization. The door opened. The smell was what reached them first. Old paper and ink and cedar from the storage boxes, and something beneath those that was harder to name, the specific atmosphere of a room that had been closed since a particular moment in time, and that carried that moment in the quality of its air. Mikoto stood at the threshold for a moment. He stood beside her, and did not move until she moved. She stepped in. The archive was larger than he had expected from the administrative description. 3 rooms, connecting, with shelving along all the walls and a central work table in the first room and the storage boxes stacked in precise order, because whoever had sealed this room had done so with care, had known that order mattered even in endings. Mikoto walked along the first bank of shelves slowly. She read the labels on the storage boxes, which were in a hand he did not recognize, a formal archival hand from the right period. "This is Taro's writing," she said. "Who was Taro?" "The clan archivist. He was 63 when," she paused, the shortest pause, "he was meticulous. He had been the archivist for 40 years. He took more care of these records than most people take of living things." She touched the edge of one of the boxes, not opening it, just touching it. "He would be," another small pause, "glad to know they were ordered. That they survived." Naruto stood quietly and let her take her time. She moved through the first room methodically, reading every label, building the map of what was there. He followed at a respectful distance, taking notes when she indicated something significant, otherwise simply present, which was what the room required from him. In the third room, at the back of the last shelf, she stopped. "These are the clan council records," she said. "From the final year." He came to stand beside her. The boxes were labeled in the same careful hand. Internal deliberations. Correspondence with the Hokage's office. Security assessments. Member welfare records. "The correspondence with the Hokage's office," he said, and his voice was very quiet. "Do you want me to be here when you open that one?" She looked at the box. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I want a witness." He nodded. She lifted the box from the shelf and set it on the nearest surface, and opened it, and the first document inside was a letter on official Hokage's office stationery, dated 18 months before the massacre, and it began, "The security concerns you have raised have been received and are being reviewed." She read it. He read it beside her, not over her shoulder but beside her, which was different. There were 12 letters in the correspondence box. They read all of them. It took 2 hours. By the end of the 2 hours the quality of the air in the room had changed, or perhaps what had changed was what they brought to it, the full understanding now of what the archive contained and what it meant. Naruto set down the last letter. He looked at the room. "The accounting you mentioned," he said. "Yes," she said. "I am going to need Shikamaru," he said. "And the council. And this is going to be," he paused, finding the right word, "significant. In ways the village will have to face." "Yes," she said again. "Are you prepared for that?" She looked at the shelves, at Taro's careful handwriting on every box, at the record of a clan that had been meticulous about its own existence, and had been failed anyway. "I have been prepared for this for 16 years, she said. "I have been waiting for someone willing to open the door." He looked at her. "Then we begin," he said. "We begin," she agreed. The archive held everything it had always held, patient and ordered and waiting, and 2 people stood in it, and began the work of making it present again, and the morning outside went about its business entirely unaware that something old and important had just been unsealed, and that what came next would ask a great deal of everyone, and would be worth asking. Chapter 35, Kushina and the Spring Return. Spring came to Konoha the way it always came, without announcement, the way the most reliable things arrive, one morning simply different from all the mornings before it. The air changed, the quality of light shifted, the ground giving off the first real warmth of the turning year. The river path that Naruto and Kushina ran was different in spring. The willows were coming back, first as a haze of green so pale it was almost gold, and then more definitely, and the path was soft underfoot from the thaw and smelled of everything beginning again. They were at the bend, the one that had become by now their habitual stopping point, the flat stone at the water's edge still cold from winter, the river running higher and faster than it had in the autumn. I want to tell you about Minato, Kushina said. It was the first time she had said his name directly, in the first person, as the person he was to her rather than as the historical figure. Naruto went very still. You do not have to, he said. I know, she said. I want to. She looked at the river. I have been building toward it. I was not ready before. I needed to, she paused, organizing, I needed to know you well enough first. To know that telling you would be giving you something rather than putting something on you that was too heavy. And now I know you well enough. She sat on the flat stone, pulling her knees up the way she sat when she was settling in for something long and important, the posture of someone who has decided to be entirely present for what comes next. He sat beside her, close enough, and looked at the river. He was funny, she said, and her voice had a quality he had not heard in it before, the quality of someone speaking from a place that was very deep and very real and that they had protected carefully for a long time. People remember him as golden and heroic and the fourth Hokage, and all of that was true, but he was also genuinely funny. Not performer funny. The kind of funny that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. He would say something completely ordinary, and then there would be this turn at the end that nobody saw coming and I would be laughing before I understood why. Naruto listened. He was afraid of loud birds, she said. Not afraid exactly, but strongly averse. There was a bird that used to sit in the tree outside our apartment window and make a noise that he described as personally offensive, and he was very serious about this, which made it funnier. She smiled, a small, real smile that was entirely about the memory rather than the telling of it. He would have been embarrassed for you to know that. He would also have thought it was funny. I am glad to know it, Naruto said. He was patient, she continued. With a specific kind of patience that was not passive. It was active waiting. He would hold a problem in front of him for days without trying to solve it, and people thought he was not working on it, and then he would produce a solution that showed he had been inside it the whole time, just quietly. She looked at the water. You do that too, do I? The eastern border situation. Shikamaru told me you held it for 3 weeks before the Yoshino session, just carrying it, before you were ready to work on it differently. That is Minato's patience. He was quiet for a moment. What did he love? Naruto asked. Beyond the obvious things. She thought about this with genuine care, which was how she thought about most things that mattered. Early mornings, she said. He was always up before me. I would come out of the bedroom, and he would be at the window with his tea, just looking at the village waking up. He said the village in the first hour of the day was the most honest version of it. A pause. Bookbinding. He had a collection of very old texts that he had rebound himself, and he was particular about it. The specific thread and the specific adhesive and the technique for each type of spine. It required the same kind of patient precision he applied to everything. Another pause. And you? Before you were born. He was afraid of so many things about it. The responsibility, and whether he was ready and whether the village was ready, and all the reasonable fears of a person who thinks carefully. But the love was already there long before you arrived. I could feel him organizing everything around it. Naruto could not speak for a moment. She looked at him, and there was nothing managed in her expression, nothing held back or composed. He would have been so proud of you, she said. Not of the Hokage. Not of the things you have done that people talk about. Of you? The specific person. She reached over and put her hand over his, briefly, the way she sometimes did when words were not enough but presence was. He would have loved you exactly as you are. The river ran fast beside them. The willows moved in the early spring wind. A bird called from somewhere upstream, and it was not the loud bird from the old apartment, but it did not matter, the thought of it was enough, the smallness and the humanness of a great man being strongly averse to a specific bird, and Naruto sat with his mother's hand over his and felt the presence of his father in the morning air, which smelled of the river and the new green and everything beginning, and was grateful. Beyond any articulation, for both of them. Chapter 36, Hitomi's East Wall, completed. They had planned the east corner repair for 3 weeks before they did it. Hitomi had drawn the plan. Naruto had sourced the materials, which had required more research than either of them had initially estimated because the original stones were a local variety that was no longer quarried in the same location, and finding matching replacements required tracing the stone's origin and then finding who currently worked the nearest equivalent deposit. He had found someone. The woman who ran the small stonemason operation in the northern civilian quarter, who had been in her trade for 40 years and who, when he had explained what he was looking for, had gone into her supply yard and produced, after 20 minutes of serious searching, a selection of stones that were not identical but were, she said, the same geological conversation. Which she explained meant they came from formations that had been the same deposit, separated by geological time. Hitomi had agreed, when he had shown her photographs, that they were right. They began on a Saturday in early spring, starting before the afternoon heat, which meant arriving at the garden at 7 in the morning when the air was still carrying the night's cool and the wisteria was doing its extraordinary spring thing, the dense purple blooms that Hitomi had described, once, as excessive in the best possible way. She had the plan. He had the materials. They had agreed on the sequence. The work required careful dismantling first, removing the stones that had shifted from the wisteria root pressure without disturbing the surrounding sections that were stable. Hitomi directed and Naruto executed, because she understood the structure and he understood how to apply force precisely, and the combination worked better than either of them separately would have. By mid-morning they had the shifted section out, and the root system visible beneath it. The root has been growing for at least 10 years, Hitomi said, crouching to examine it. Possibly 15. It is not the wisteria's fault. It was here before the wall. Can we redirect it? He asked. We can guide it. There is a direction it can grow that will not compromise the foundation. She traced the path with one finger, not touching the root, just indicating. If we create a channel in this direction and give the root a reason to prefer it, it will go there. What gives a root a reason to prefer a direction? Water and space. She looked up at him. The same things that give most living things a reason to prefer a direction. He thought about this. They created the channel. They laid the new stones, which fit into the existing pattern with the rightness that the stonemason had promised, the geological conversation continuing across the gap of time. Hitomi mortared with the precision of someone who understood structural load. Naruto handed materials and held positions and learned by watching what she was doing and occasionally being corrected when his grip was wrong. He did not mind being corrected. He was here to learn and to help, and the corrections were given without impatience, in the flat instructive tone that contained no judgment beyond the information itself. By late afternoon the section was complete. They stood back from it. The repair was invisible in the way that good repairs were invisible, not because the new stones were identical but because they were right, because the work had been done with enough care and enough understanding of the original that the whole was coherent again. Good, Hitomi said. It was the highest register of her approval, and he had learned this. Thank you, he said, for letting me help with it. She looked at the wall. You sourced the stones, she said. The geological conversation was your idea, or rather the stonemason's idea that you recognized as right and brought to me. Without the right stones this was a repair that would need doing again in 5 years. It will need doing again eventually. Yes, she said. That is the nature of walls and roots and gardens. They require ongoing attention. She paused, and her voice had the quality it sometimes took on, very precise and aimed at something specific. Most worthwhile things do. He looked at her. She was looking at the wall with the calm assessment of someone who is satisfied with a piece of work and is simultaneously thinking about the next piece. There is a section on the north face, she said, that will need attention in the next year or two. Nothing urgent, but worth planning for. I will be available, he said. She glanced at him then, the brief sidelong look she used when something he said was simpler and more complete than she had expected. Yes, she said. I know you will. The garden held them in its early spring version, the wisteria blooming in its purple excess, the stones of the east wall standing in their new and correct configuration, the root beneath them guided now toward a channel that had room for it, and the afternoon was mild and smelled of growing things and mortar, and the particular clean satisfaction of work that had been done with care, and that would hold. Chapter 37 Mito and the Third Category. The third category of Uzumaki sealing techniques was, as Mito had said, something that most current sealing theory did not have adequate language to describe. She had spent years trying to find the language herself, coming at it from multiple directions, from the technical description of what the seal did mechanically, from the philosophical framework of what the Uzumaki founders had intended, from the observed effects in the few cases where documentation existed, and from her own practice of techniques adjacent to it. None of these approaches had produced the right language on its own. She had been telling Naruto about it, in installments, over the course of the winter and into the spring, each Sunday session adding another layer of the explanation. He had been listening with the full, patient, accumulating attention that she had come to rely on, the quality of someone who could hold multiple incomplete pieces of understanding at once without forcing them into premature coherence. Today she had brought a diagram. She set it on the kitchen table between them. It was not a technical diagram in the standard sealing notation. She had drawn it herself, in a style that combined technical precision with the older Uzushio visual language, the one that expressed relational concepts spatially rather than symbolically. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. The outer rings, he said finally, are what I recognize from standard Uzumaki technique. The centripetal structure. The drawing inward. Yes. But the center is different. The center is the third category, she said. In the first and second categories, the center is fixed. The drawing inward creates a stable point, and the subject moves toward it and stays. In the third category, she pointed to the center of the diagram, the center is not fixed. It is responsive. It moves in relationship to what comes toward it. He looked at this. It adjusts, he said. It is in conversation with what it contains, she said. The distinction is significant. A fixed center holds by not changing. A responsive center holds by changing appropriately, by being in continuous relationship with the forces that move toward it. She paused. This is substantially harder to achieve. It requires the seal to be alive in a way that the first and second categories are not. The seal must be capable of, she searched, of receiving information and responding to it without losing the essential structure. He was very quiet. This is what you do, she said. He looked up from the diagram. Not the sealing technique, she said. The principle. You are a responsive center. You hold the people around you not by being fixed but by being in continuous appropriate relationship with them. You adjust without losing the essential structure. She looked at him with the clear, long-seeing eyes that had been watching the world for a very long time. This is the rarest expression of the clan gift. Almost no one achieves it. The founders theorized it and documented it, but there are almost no historical examples of a practitioner who embodied it fully. Why almost no one? He asked. Because it requires complete trust in the essential structure, she said. To be responsive, to allow yourself to change and move in relationship with what comes toward you, you must be absolutely certain that the center will hold regardless. Most people, when they are uncertain of the center, become rigid. Rigidity is a compensation for insecurity. It looks like strength. It is not. She paused. You were certain of the center before you had evidence that you should be. You trusted it when trust was not yet reasonable. I did not know that is what I was doing, he said. The founders did not know either, she said. At first. It is understood by doing before it is understood by thinking. She picked up her tea. What I am telling you now is the thinking about what you have been doing. The doing was already complete. He sat back in his chair and looked at the diagram. The seal in the diagram, he said. Has it been achieved? In practice? Once, she said. That I know of. In the records I have been able to reconstruct. A woman named Uzumaki Kana, from the generation before Uzushio's fall. The records describe what she was able to do as, she paused, finding the phrase, holding without closing. Which is precisely it. Holding without closing, he repeated. Yes. He looked at her. You have been building toward telling me this, he said. Not accusatory. Recognizing. Since the first session, she admitted. I needed you to understand the structure before I could tell you what it meant. The meaning without the structure would have been flattery. The structure without the meaning would have been incomplete. And now you have both. She stood and went to the stove to check on the afternoon's preparation, which was a spring soup that required minimal supervision, but benefited from presence. What you do with them is your own. He sat at her kitchen table in the spring light and looked at the diagram of the third category, and felt something settle in him that had been unsettled for a very long time, the specific settling of a person who has been given language for something they have always known without words, and finds that the words do not diminish the knowing but deepen it, make it more available, more fully their own. Chapter 38. The Council Faces the Archive. The full council meeting was held on a Tuesday in April, in the meeting room with the high windows and the old table and the institutional tapestries that said nothing to anyone. Shikamaru had prepared a briefing document that was 40 pages long, which was the appropriate length for something this significant, and had prefaced it with a single page of executive summary that was honest in the particular way that only Shikamaru Nara could be honest, without qualification or diplomatic cushioning, the truth stated in full and left to be received. Naruto had read the briefing 3 times. He had sat with the Uchiha archive correspondence for 2 weeks before bringing it to the council. He had spoken with Mikoto every day of those 2 weeks, not to rehearse what he would say but to ensure he understood what he was presenting, that the picture he gave the council was accurate and complete. The council listened to the briefing in the particular silence of people receiving information that requires significant adjustment to prior understanding. When Shikamaru finished, the silence continued for a moment. Councilwoman Haruki, who had been on the council for 20 years and had been forming and revising her views throughout, was the first to speak. She asked 3 questions, in sequence, that were the right questions. The questions of someone who understood what the information meant for the council's accountability, and was not trying to avoid that meaning. Naruto answered them directly. The discussion that followed was long, and at times difficult. There were members who had known the previous administration and who carried the specific discomfort of people receiving information that implicated decisions made by people they had respected. Naruto did not manage this discomfort for them. He let it be what it was and continued to answer questions. Councilman Daisuke, near the end of the 3rd hour, said, "What is the Hokage's recommendation?" Naruto looked at the table for a moment. "The archive should be fully catalogued and made accessible," he said. "Not as a restricted historical record. As a public one. The clan's history belongs to the public record of the village." He paused. "There should be a formal acknowledgement from this council of what the correspondence shows. Not as punishment or as reopening old judgments. As accuracy. The village's account of what happened should be accurate." Another pause. "And Mikoto Uchiha should be formally recognized as the last senior member of the Uchiha clan and given whatever standing that entails in the village's governance structures, which Shikamaru has outlined in Section 4 of the briefing." The council deliberated. It was not an easy deliberation. Naruto expected that, and was prepared for it. He answered questions without impatience, and without repetition, and without the particular kind of rhetorical pressure that would have made the deliberation easier in the short term and less real in the long one. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. He had not expected unanimity. He had prepared for a majority. He sat for a moment with the fact of it. After the meeting, when the chamber was emptying, Shikamaru came and stood beside him. "Unanimous," Shikamaru said. "I know. You were not expecting that." "No. They voted what they actually believed," Shikamaru said, with the tone of a man who understands how rare this is and gives it appropriate weight. "Not what was politically expedient. What they actually believed, after reading the briefing. That is what you built with this council. That is what 2 years of showing up and being honest about difficult things has made possible." Naruto looked at the old table, which had held so many decisions over so many years. "Tell Mikoto," he said. "You should tell her." "I know. But I want her to have the information before I see her. I want her to have the time I had with it." He paused. "Send the formal notification. I will go to her this evening." "Done," Shikamaru said, and there was something in his voice, underneath the efficiency, that was simply and completely the response of someone who has witnessed something right. Chapter 39, Biwako and What She Kept. Biwako Sarutobi had kept, over the course of 81 years, very few objects. She had lived through enough reorganizations of her life to understand that objects were not memory, that the things you carried in your hands were less durable than the things you carried in your mind, and she had developed, over time, a relationship with possessions that was friendly but not sentimental. There was, however, a wooden box. The box sat on the shelf in her sitting room and contained 14 items, each one chosen with the precision she applied to everything, each one the specific representative of something that deserved a representative. A child's drawing from Hiruzen's daughter, who was now a grandmother herself. A pressed leaf from the tree that had stood in the garden of the first house she and Hiruzen had shared, which was no longer there. A folded letter from a friend who had died in the Second War, not the content of the letter, which she knew by heart, but the physical object, the paper that had been held by those specific hands. On a Tuesday in April she added a new item. It was a small flat stone from the lane wall, one that had worked loose in the winter, and that she had found at the base of the wall one morning and picked up without quite deciding to. She had held it in her palm in the lane and felt its weight, which was the weight of all the evenings she had sat on that wall with her own thoughts and, increasingly, with company. She put it in the box with the care she put everything in the box. Naruto found her, that evening, in the lane with Kurenai Yuhi, who was visiting for the week and who was one of the people Biwako had known long enough that their friendship required no maintenance, only the pleasure of resumed presence. They were talking when he came along the lane, and Kurenai excused herself graciously and went inside, and Naruto settled onto the wall. "Good news," he said. "The council." "Yes. I heard," she said. Shikamaru's assistant mentioned it to the administrative network, discreetly, which in Konoha means everyone knows within 3 hours. She looked at the lane. Unanimous. Yes. Hiruzen would have, she began, and then stopped. She was quiet for a moment. He would have wanted this. I believe that. What he did not do, what he allowed to proceed by not acting, came from a failure of nerve in a specific moment under specific pressures, not from a fundamental wrongness in his understanding. He knew it was wrong. He knew it later, and he carried that. She paused. The unanimous vote is the village acknowledging what he should have acknowledged. It is the village catching up to what was true. That is a generous reading, Naruto said. It is an accurate one, she said. I do not do generous at the expense of accurate. I am too old. She looked at him. You gave the village the opportunity to catch up. That is different from absolving what preceded it. Both can be true. Both are true, he agreed. She looked at the lane for a while. I have been thinking, she said, about what I want to say to you. Not to the Hokage. To you? She paused, organizing with the care of someone who has thought about this for some time. When I was young, which was a very long time ago, I believed that the significant things in a life were its large events. The decisions that changed things. The moments that history would record. She paused. I understand now that the significant things are the textures. The evenings on the wall. The conversations that did not lead anywhere except toward the next conversation. The presence of people who show up. She looked at him. You have been one of the significant textures of the last year of my life. I wanted to say that clearly, while I am in a position to say it clearly. He sat with this. You have been one of mine, he said. I know, she said. I can see it. That is a particular comfort. She looked at the stars, which were beginning in the east. I have put a stone from this wall in my keeping box. It seemed right. I did not know you had a keeping box. Most people do not. She looked at him with the brightness in her eyes that was her version of warmth, precise and real and entirely its own. Now you do. They sat on the wall while the stars came out, as they had on many evenings before this one, and the lane was quiet and the night was mild, and Biwako Sarutobi sat with the 7th Hokage in the easy, established configuration of people who have given each other something real, and knew it, and were grateful. Chapter 40. May and the letter she read aloud. May Terumi read letters aloud to herself sometimes, in the privacy of her residence, when she was trying to understand something by hearing it rather than seeing it. Language, she had discovered, behaved differently in the air than on the page. Things that looked clear in text became complex when spoken, or things that looked complex on the page became clear when voiced. The difference was information, and she was someone who valued information. She read Naruto's April letter aloud on a Thursday evening in Kirigakure, with the window open and the sea air coming in and the sound of the harbor in the background. The letter was 5 pages. It described the council vote and the archive situation in terms that were frank and specific, because they had established that frankness was the protocol for the things that mattered. It described his conversation with Kushina at the river in spring, in the way he sometimes described conversations in his letters, not as report but as reflection, turning the experience in his hands and looking at what it showed him. It described a Saturday morning in a garden with a repaired wall, and the geological conversation between old stones and new ones. And at the end, in the handwriting that expanded when he was writing something he had been thinking about for a long time. There is a thing I have been working out how to say, and I have decided the only way to say it is directly, because indirection is not actually kinder, it is only more comfortable for the person doing the saying, which is not a good enough reason. I have been thinking about you in the way I think about the people who constitute my coordinate system. That is the thing I told you, in an earlier letter, that I navigate by more than one coordinate now. You are one of them. You have been for a while. I thought you should know that explicitly rather than approximately, because you are someone who values precision, and I would rather be precise about something true than approximate about something important. She set the letter down. She picked it up and read that section again. She had been carrying something for the past several months that she had not yet found the right container for. This letter was the container. She recognized it the way you recognize the right vessel for something you have been holding in your hands, with the specific relief of setting it down in the right place. She wrote back that evening. She wrote, I am going to tell you something that is also direct, because you have established the register, and I am capable of meeting it. I have been thinking about precision, and what it means to be precise about something important. Being precise means saying the real thing rather than the approximate thing, even when the approximate thing would be easier. The real thing I want to say is this: you are a coordinate for me also. You have been since the first balcony conversation, though I did not have language for it then, and was not ready to claim it if I had. I am claiming it now. I am telling you precisely because you told me precisely, and because you deserve the same quality of truth in return. She sealed the letter. She sat for a moment with the particular quality of feeling that comes after something has been said that needed to be said, not the relief of a burden released but the different feeling, the opening, the sense of a space becoming available that was previously occupied by something that needed resolving. She went to the window and looked at the harbor. Kirigakura at night was the most specifically itself of all its hours. The mist that gave it its name came in from the sea in the dark and softened everything, not obscuring but diffusing, so that the lights of the harbor and the residential district were present but gentled, and the smell of the sea was at its strongest, and the sound of the water against the stone of the harbor wall was clear. She had always loved it here. She had not always understood what it meant to love a place and also to be a person larger than any single place, to have both of those things be true simultaneously without one diminishing the other. She understood it now. She thought about what he had written, that having more than one coordinate made him steadier in all of them rather than diluting any of them. She had turned this over many times since he first wrote it. She had tested it against her own experience, against the way she felt about Kiri and the way she felt about the conversations on balconies and in morning streets, and at the stone faces of carved monuments. He was right. She was steadier. She left the window open and went to put the letter in the diplomatic pouch for Thursday's outgoing courier, and behind her the sea wind moved through the room and the mist was on the harbor and Kirigakure was being entirely and beautifully itself, and she was being herself in it, and both of those things were, as she had only recently understood, precisely enough. Chapter 41. The day Mikoto said something she had not said before. The work of the archive took 3 months. It was meticulous work. Not the cataloging, which Taro had done, and which only required the transfer of existing notations into current systems. What took the time was the reading. Mikoto read everything. She read it with the full attention she had always brought to things that deserved it, which was most things, and she made notes, and she cross-referenced, and she occasionally came to a document that required her to set it down for a moment before she could continue. Naruto was present for most of the reading sessions. Not because she needed him to be. Because she had asked him to be. This had happened quietly, without announcement early in the process. She had looked up from a document and said, "Are you available tomorrow morning?" And he had said yes and come the next morning and the morning after that, and the process had established itself with the solidity of things that are simply right. He sat at the work table across from her and reviewed current administrative documents, or read or simply kept company, which was a thing he was good at, being present without requiring the presence to be acknowledged. On a morning in June, deep in the archive's third room, she found the box that contained the clan's member records. He saw her stop. She held a folder for a long moment before opening it. He set down what he was doing. Inside were documents he understood immediately to be records of the clan members themselves, not administrative records but personal ones. Health records. Educational records. The records of a clan tracking its own people with the care of a community that understood that individuals constituted the whole, and that the whole required the individuals to be known. She turned through the pages. She was looking for specific names. He could see that she knew what she was looking for and was building toward it, and that he should simply hold the space. She found what she was looking for. He did not ask what it was. He waited. Sasuke's records, she said. Her voice was entirely steady, which was the thing about Mikoto that sometimes cost her the most, the steadiness that she maintained regardless. His health assessments. His academy marks. A letter from his first-year instructor about his progress. She paused. A note from his brother about, she stopped. She set the folder down. She pressed her hands flat on the table, and she breathed, and the breathing was measured and deliberate, and he understood that this was her managing something very large in the only way she knew how, through structure and will. He did not try to solve this. He simply moved his chair around the table and sat beside her, close enough that she could feel he was there, which was what the moment required and nothing more. After a while she said, very quietly, I had thought I was prepared for this section. You are prepared for it, he said. This is what prepared looks like when the thing is this. She looked at him. Something in her face, under the composure, was completely open, the way she was only in moments of extremity, the full unguarded reality of her. I was not a perfect mother, she said. I need to say that. To someone who will receive it accurately rather than reassure me out of it. She held his gaze. There are things I should have seen and said earlier. Things I prioritized incorrectly because I was managing other things and I believed I had more time. She paused. I do not say this to torture myself. I say it because it is true and because true things should be said. Yes, he said, and the word was the full acknowledgement she had asked for. Not agreement with her self-criticism but agreement with the principle, that true things deserve to be spoken. I loved them, she said. Both of them. Completely. Whatever else was true, that was true first and last. I know, he said. How do you know? Because I can see it in the way you hold those records, he said. You are holding them the way you hold things that are precious. You are not aware that you are doing it. That is how I know. She looked down at her hands, which were indeed holding the folder with a care that was entirely unconscious and entirely real. She was quiet for a long time. I am glad you opened the archive, she said finally. I was afraid of it. I did not tell you that. I knew, he said, and you opened it anyway. Because afraid and necessary are not the same thing. He paused. And because I knew you well enough to know that you were afraid the way people are afraid of things they need, not things they should avoid. She looked at him for a long moment. The archive room was very quiet around them and the morning light came through the high window in a long clean bar that lay across the work table and the folders and the records of a clan that had been kept with love and meticulous care and that was, now, after all this time, being read. Naruto, she said, and it was the first time she had used his name alone, without any form of address, just a name, direct and without distance. He looked at her. Thank you, she said. For all of it. Not just the archive. All of it. He did not minimize this. He received it. Thank you, he said, for being here. For being someone I could learn to know. For all of it. The morning held them in its particular June quality, warm and clear and generous with its light, and the archive was present around them with all its contained history, and neither of them was elsewhere. Chapter 42, Summer and the Weight of Good Things. Summer in Konoha was a different order of beauty from spring. Spring was the announcement. Summer was the thing itself, the full expression of what the season had been building toward, the trees in their complete leaf and the gardens at their most productive, and the days long enough to contain everything you wanted them to contain, and still have light left over at the end. Naruto moved through his summer differently than he had moved through previous summers. He had not changed his schedule significantly. He still ran the river path most evenings and sat with the council on its proper schedule and managed the administrative work of a village that was alive and complicated and constantly requiring the next thing from him. The difference was harder to locate than a schedule change. He had concluded after some thought, inhabiting the year differently. Moving through it with less of the subtle guardedness that he had maintained, largely without knowing it, for most of his life. The guardedness of someone who understood that the things he valued could be taken, who had learned this young and had carried the lesson without being entirely aware that he was still carrying it. It was less present now. He was sitting in Yoshino's reading room on a Wednesday afternoon in July, which had become, over the year, a regular fixture, the combination of work and company that functioned as both, when she looked up from the document she was reviewing and said, without preamble, "You are different this summer." He looked up from the boundary survey he was reviewing. "Different how?" She set down her pen with the precision of someone choosing their words. "When you came here the first time, with a Chiraka takeout and a document I had been looking for, you had the quality of a person who was genuinely present but was also watching the door." She held his gaze. "Not literally. Metaphorically. The internal posture of someone who expects pleasant things to end." He did not argue with this. "You are not watching the door anymore," she said. He looked at the survey for a moment. "No," he said. "I am not." What changed? He thought about this honestly, in the way he had been thinking about things more honestly since he had stopped watching the door, since the guardedness had loosened enough to allow the full weight of what was actually there to register. "I believed it," he said. "I think that is the most accurate thing. I believed it. Not just knew it or was grateful for it or understood it intellectually. I believed it in the way that means you have stopped waiting for it to become untrue." She looked at him for a moment. "Good," she said, and the word was simple and complete and contained, in its 2 letters, the specific quality of Yoshino Nara at her most genuine. He looked at her. "You planned for this too," he said. "Like the ramen. Like the 3 questions. You have been," he paused, "you have been doing this deliberately." She held his gaze without conceding anything and without denying anything. "I planned for possibilities," she said. "What people do with the possibilities is their own." "Yoshino-san," he said. "Naruto," she said, and the name without form of address was a thing she had been doing more frequently, and each time it arrived with the quality of a door standing open. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it for everything, for the ramen and the 3 questions and the records and the late evenings and the New Year morning at her kitchen table and the planning for possibilities and all the ways that a practical and precise and genuinely good woman had decided, without announcement, that his well-being was something she was going to attend to. She picked up her pen. "The survey," she said. "The northeastern boundary notation on page 6 is incorrect. The transcription error is 40 years old and has been repeated in every subsequent survey. It will matter when the Boundary Commission reviews the autumn agricultural allocations." He looked at page 6. She was right. He made the notation, and the afternoon continued in its warm and particular way, and through the reading room window the July light came in at the angle it came at in this room at this hour, which he knew now the way you know the qualities of rooms you have spent good time in, and both of them worked, and it was very pleasant, and neither of them was anywhere else. Chapter 43. All the coordinates together. There was a dinner, in late July, that had not been planned as a significant event. It had grown from a practical need, which was that the Kirigakure delegation was in Konoha for the Summer Trade Summit, and the summit's final evening called for a formal meal, and the formal meal's guest list required both diplomatic courtesy and genuine thought about who should be at the table. Naruto had assembled the list with more care than he usually gave to formal dinners. He had thought about what the evening needed to be, not just diplomatically but as itself, and he had invited accordingly. The dinner was in the Hokage residence's formal dining room, which was large enough for the table required and which had windows that opened onto the garden, and in July with the windows open the garden came into the room, the smell of it, and the sound of the evening insects, and the quality of the late summer air. Mei Terumi arrived first among the Konoha side guests, which he suspected was deliberate, the Mizuki's habit of knowing a room before the room was full. She came in wearing the formal Kiri diplomatic colors and looked at him with the expression she reserved for moments when they were about to be in a professional context and were making the adjustment from whatever they had been before it. "The garden is extraordinary," she said. "It has a good summer," he said. The guests arrived. Yoshino, who had been invited with the specific and honest explanation that she was someone whose presence improved every room she entered, and who had accepted with the dry graciousness of someone who recognizes a true thing and receives it correctly. Mikoto, who was here as the formally recognized senior Uchiha clan member, a status the council had confirmed 2 months ago, and which she wore with the composure she wore everything but that had, underneath, something that was new and quietly profound. Hitomi, who had come as both a Hyuga elder and as herself, the distinction growing smaller over the months in the way distinctions grew smaller between people who had learned each other. Mito, who was here as the village's primary Uzumaki elder, and who had dressed in the red that Uzumaki people wore when they wanted to be unambiguous about who they were. Sim, who had arrived with Hana, because Hana had been added to the list with Naruto's genuine explanation that the Inuzuka clan's practical representation was better served by both of them than by one. Biwako, who had been invited last, because he had been uncertain whether her health permitted a late evening, and who had been mildly offended by the uncertainty, and had resolved it by arriving punctually and entirely alert. Shikamaru was there, because Shikamaru was always there for things that mattered, in the background way that was his natural mode and that was more present than most people's foreground. The Kirigakure delegation was 4 people, Mei's senior diplomatic staff and trade representatives, all of them good at their work. They sat. The food was good, the kitchen having been given genuine latitude and having used it well. The conversations assembled themselves in the natural way of dinners where the people present know each other well enough to talk to each other genuinely rather than performing the conversation for the table. Naruto moved through the evening the way he moved through things now, fully present and not watching any doors. He talked to the Kirigakure trade representative about the Maritime Charter's practical implications and learned something he had not known about the fishing cooperative structures on the Western Islands. He talked to Mito about the sealing traditions that had unexpected overlap with Kiri's own water-binding techniques, a conversation she and Mei were pulled into and that grew into something genuinely interesting. He listened to Biwako tell Hana a story about the Second War that Hana clearly had not heard before, and that was exactly the right story for Hana in the specific way that Biwako's stories were always exactly the right story for whoever she was telling them to. He noticed Mikoto and Yoshino in conversation at the far end of the table, the 2 of them in the particular register of 2 precise, intelligent people who have discovered they think alike about something important, and are working out the full extent of it. He noticed Hitomi listening to the Kirigakure diplomatic staff member describe a sensory training technique used in the mist environment of Kiri's coastal operations, her attention complete and her questions, when she asked them, landing with the focused precision of someone who knew exactly what she was interested in and why. He noticed Sim eating the food with unabashed appreciation and telling Hana something in the low, swift communication of Inuzuka partners that made Hana's eyes light with a particular amusement. He noticed Mei, across the table, who was talking to the trade representative and was simultaneously tracking the room the way she always tracked rooms, with the comprehensive situational awareness of the Mizuki. She glanced at him at the same moment he was looking at her, which happens sometimes with people who are paying attention to the same things, and something passed between them in that glance that was not public and was not for the table but was entirely real. He looked at the room. At all of it. He thought about the whirlpool. About the center that was responsive rather than fixed. About holding without closing. About the coordinate system that was multiple and that made you steadier in all of its points rather than diluting any of them. He thought about Shikamaru, who had noticed the architecture building and had said nothing and had prepared 40-page briefings and gotten here early to check the seating. He thought about the year that had been. The river path and the kitchen and the lane wall and the garden and the training grounds and the archive and all the evenings and all the mornings and all the particular, ordinary, extraordinary hours of it. He was not watching any doors. Biwako caught his eye from across the table and the brightness in her ancient eyes said something that required no translation. He picked up his glass. "I want to say something," he said, and the table settled into its attention the way people settle when someone speaks with the specific quality that comes from meaning what they are about to say. "I am not going to make a speech," he said, which produced a sound from the table that was various people's versions of relieved amusement. "I just want to say that I am glad everyone is here. Genuinely glad. Not as a formality." He paused. "This is a table of people I have learned from this year in ways I did not anticipate and cannot fully account for. And I think the right thing to do with that is to say it out loud rather than carry it quietly." He raised his glass. "To the year," he said. "And to the people in it." The table raised their glasses. The summer garden came through the open windows with its smell and its sounds and its complete, uncomplicated, living presence, and the room was full of the people who constituted his coordinate system, who had built something real out of their accumulated small things, and who were, all of them, exactly where they were supposed to be. And the evening went on, and the conversations continued, and the food was finished, and the tea came, and the hours moved in the way hours move when you are not watching for them to end, and the summer night outside was full of its particular beauty, and inside the Hokage residence the lamplight held everyone in its warm and particular circle, and Naruto Uzumaki, the seventh Hokage, who had been a boy that the village had not known what to do with and had grown into the person who knew what to do with the village, sat at the head of his table with everything he had built around him, and was, in the most complete and honest sense of the word, home. Act 5, Everything That Holds, in which the ordinary morning becomes the extraordinary life, and the center holds. Chapter 44, The Morning After the Summer Dinner. The morning after the summer dinner arrived the way mornings arrive after evenings that have been exactly what they needed to be, slowly and with particular kindness, the light coming in at a low angle and the air still carrying the night's cool, and the village below the Hokage residence quiet in the way it was only in the earliest hour, before the market carts and the training grounds and the administrative machinery had all turned over into motion. Naruto was already awake. He was often already awake before the village was, which was one of the things about the position that he had not anticipated and that he now understood was not a burden but a gift, those hours in which the village existed as a sound rather than an event, as something breathing rather than something doing. He sat at the small table in the kitchen of the residence with tea he had made himself, looking at the garden through the glass door that opened onto it. The garden in early morning was different from the garden in the evening, when it had been full of people and lamplight, and the particular energy of a dinner that was going well. Now it was just itself, the grass with the dew still on it, the late summer flowers beginning to open in the first warmth of the sun, the stone path through the center catching the light in a way that made it look like something old and considered. He thought about the dinner. He thought about all of them at the table and the conversations he had been part of and the ones he had observed and the particular, cumulative quality of an evening in which every person present had been genuinely themselves. He had hosted formal dinners before. He had been to formal dinners before. They were rarely like that. Usually there was a layer, a performance quality, the management of impression that people maintained even in pleasant social contexts. Last night had not had that layer. Or rather, the layer had been present at the beginning, the formal adjustment of the Kiri delegation finding its footing with Konoha people they had not met, and had dissolved over the course of the first hour into something that did not need it. He thought about May, specifically. He thought about the glance across the table that had been a private exchange in a public room, and the letter she had sent, and the one he had received and read on an evening in June when the word precision had reorganized something in his understanding of what was possible. He thought about what Biwako had said at the table, the story she had told Hana about the Second War, and the brightness in her eyes when she had caught his across the room, and what that brightness contained, which was a whole long life of seeing things clearly and the specific satisfaction of seeing something good. He thought about Makoto, who had sat next to Yoshino for most of the evening and had been, he had noticed, more fully at ease than he had ever seen her in a social context. Not performing composure. Just at ease. He thought about Kushina, who had not been at the dinner, because the dinner was a diplomatic occasion and her standing in the village's official structures was still being worked out, and who had sent him a note that evening that said only, "I hope it went well. I will want to hear everything. Save me the dessert if any survived." He had saved her the dessert. The sun was moving now, coming up over the residential district to the east, and the garden was brightening, and somewhere in the village the first cart was moving on the market street, and the day was beginning. He refilled his tea. He was not watching any doors. He was sitting in the morning in his house with his tea and the garden and the knowledge of all the people who were, each in their own part of the village, also coming into their days, and he was in the most unguarded and complete sense of the word content. Not satisfied, which was a smaller thing, not the absence of wanting but the presence of sufficiency. Something larger. The feeling of a life that had arrived at what it was supposed to be without his having been fully certain it would. He was still thinking this when he heard the gate. He recognized the step on the garden path before he saw her, because he had learned the particular quality of Mikoto's footfall in the way you learn the sounds of the people who constitute your daily life, the specific rhythm of them. She came around the path and saw him through the glass door. She stopped. Something moved in her expression, the quick adjustment of someone who did not expect company, and is recalibrating. He opened the glass door. "I was going to leave something at the front," she said. She had a paper bag. "From the bakery. I passed it on my way through and they had the sesame bread that is good with tea and I thought," she paused, and there was a quality in the pause of someone deciding whether to complete a sentence or retreat from it, "I thought you might want some." He looked at the paper bag. He looked at her. "Come in," he said. "I made tea." She came in. She sat at the small kitchen table with the naturalness of someone who has sat there before, which she had, and he got another cup and poured her tea and opened the paper bag, and the bakery bread was still warm and smelled of sesame, and the particular yeast of a good bakery that has been working since before dawn. They ate bread and drank tea in the morning kitchen while the garden came into its full summer light outside the glass door, and neither of them talked for a while, because neither of them needed to, and the morning was very good, and the bread was excellent, and the tea was exactly right. Chapter 45, Yoshino and the document she found. The document was in a box that had been in the records hall basement for 60 years and that Yoshino had been working through systematically since the previous autumn, because she had a comprehensive cataloging project underway that was going to take, at the rate she was proceeding, another 2 years. And she was proceeding at the rate she chose, which was thoroughly. She found it on a Tuesday morning in August, in the fourth box of the sixth crate of the third section of the basement archive, in a folder of miscellaneous administrative correspondence from the early village period that had been filed under a general heading that did not indicate its specific contents. She read the first page. She read the second page. She set the document down and sat for a moment in the basement, which smelled of old paper and cedar and the particular cool of underground spaces in summer. Then she picked it up and took it upstairs. She had 2 people she intended to show it to. She chose the order deliberately. She went first to Mikoto. Mikoto was in the reading room, which was where she usually was in the mornings now, the room having fully established itself over the months of archive work as her working space in a way that had required no formal announcement. She looked up when Yoshino came in and registered, with the perceptiveness she brought to most things, that Yoshino's expression was carrying something. "Sit down," Yoshino said, which was unusual, because she was the one who typically sat in this room and Mikoto was the one who received visitors while working. The reversal meant something. Mikoto set down her pen. Yoshino set the document on the table between them. "This was filed in the early administrative correspondence," she said. General section. "It has not been read since it was filed. The archivist notation indicates it was received, logged, and placed, which was standard procedure for low-priority correspondence at the time." Mikoto read the first page. Yoshino watched her read it. She watched the precise, composed face of a woman who had lived through a great deal and had learned to receive difficult information without losing her footing, and she watched that composure encounter something that required a different quality of management than most things. The document was a letter, dated 8 years before the massacre, written by a member of the Konoha Village Council to the Hokage's administrative office, recommending a formal review of the security concerns the Uchiha clan had been raising through proper channels for the preceding 3 years. The letter was written in careful, measured language. It advocated for the Hokage to meet directly with the clan leadership. It noted, in a footnote that had the quality of something the writer had almost not included but had decided to include, that the failure to address legitimate security concerns through legitimate channels had historically produced worse outcomes than the concerns themselves. The letter was signed. Mikoto looked at the signature for a long time. This person, she said, her voice entirely level, was trying to stop it. Yes, Yoshino said. 8 years before. Through the correct process. In writing. Yes. Mikoto set the document down. She looked at the wall of the reading room, which had nothing particular on it, and Yoshino let her look. After a while Mikoto said, "Who is the second person you are going to show this to?" "Naruto," Yoshino said. "Yes," Mikoto said. "He should see it." She paused. "I want to be there when you show him. I thought you might." They went to the Hokage's office together. Naruto was in a meeting that Shikamaru ended, with the efficient authority of a chief advisor who has correctly assessed that what is outside the meeting room is more important than what is inside it. Yoshino set the document on Naruto's desk. He read it. He read it the way he read things that mattered, slowly and completely. And when he finished he looked up at the two women standing across his desk, and his expression had the quality it took on when something reached him that was both painful and significant. 8 years, he said. Yes, said Yoshino. This person deserves to be in the account, he said. In the official account of what happened. Not buried in the archive. In the record that is going to be public. Yes, said Mikoto. He looked at the signature. I want their family to know, he said, that this letter exists. That this person tried. I will find the family, Yoshino said. Good, he said. He looked at the document for a moment longer. He looked at Mikoto. Are you all right? He asked. She met his eyes. Yes, she said, and the word was one of the most complete things she had said in a long time, a yes that meant not the absence of pain but the presence of something that could hold pain and continue, a yes that was the product of months of archive work and the council vote and the mornings at the kitchen table and the reading room and all the careful, patient, real things that had been building since she had arrived in this village and found, against every reasonable expectation, that it was possible to be held by it. Yes, she said again, more quietly. I am all right. Chapter 46. Some in the Mountains. The Inuzuka clan conducted a yearly mountain assessment, a 3-day exercise in the ranges north of Konoha that combined territorial monitoring with the deep environmental training that was the backbone of the clan's tracking and hunting traditions. It was not a mission in the standard village sense. It was something older than the mission classification system, a practice that had been part of the clan's relationship with the land before the village existed, incorporated now into the village's operational calendar with the light touch accommodation that the Inuzuka had always required from institutional structures. Tsum had led the assessment every year for 22 years. She had not expected, when she submitted the annual request to the Hokage's office for 3-day operational authorization, to receive in response a note in Naruto's handwriting that said, I would like to come if that is acceptable. Not as Hokage. As an additional observer. I will stay out of the operational work and carry my own kit. She had considered this for 2 days. She had said yes. The mountains in August were a different world from the mountains in spring or winter. The high trails were clear and the views from the ridge lines were extraordinary, the land of fire spreading out below in its full summer green, the distant gray-blue of further ranges visible on clear days in a way that made the size of the world present to you in the body rather than just in the mind. The air was thinner and cleaner than the valley air and smelled of granite and pine and the particular sharpness of altitude. Naruto moved well in the mountains. She had noted this in the first hour of the first day, the way he adjusted his gait for the terrain without being told to, the way he managed his breathing on the ascents, the way he read the trail ahead rather than watching his feet. Someone had taught him mountain movement correctly, or he had learned it from enough time in the field that the correct instincts had become second nature. He said very little for most of the first day, which she had required when she said yes and which he had accepted without comment. The assessment had its own rhythms and he adapted to them. He observed when they stopped to read sign. He listened when she and the senior clan members discussed what they were finding. He asked, occasionally, precise questions that showed he was tracking the work accurately. On the evening of the second day, at the high camp where the wind came off the north ridge and the stars were the most numerous and present she had ever seen them anywhere, She sat with Kuramaru and looked out at the dark ranges and felt Naruto settle onto the flat rock nearby, close enough for conversation, far enough that it was his choice whether to speak. She spoke first. The northern territorial marker has shifted, she said. There has been drift in the boundary reference points over the last 3 years. Something is moving in the forest at altitude, large enough and consistent enough to cause the drift. What do you think it is? Not hostile. The sign is not predatory. More like migration pattern adjustment. Something is changing in the high ecosystem that is pushing populations lower. She looked at the stars. I want to put a long-term observation protocol on the northern ridge. 2 years of data before I draw any conclusions. You have the authorization. Whatever you need. I know, she said. Not with surprise. With the simple acknowledgement of someone who has come to expect that when she says she needs something for the land, the support is there. Kuramaru shifted beside her, resettling with a comfortable grunt. Can I tell you something? Naruto said. Yes. When I was young, I did not understand why the Inuzuka were the way they were. The loudness. The physical directness. The way you did not perform things the way other clans performed things. He paused. I understand it now. You are the most honest people in the village. Not because the others are dishonest. But because you have never developed the habit of saying things a different way from how you mean them. Some looked at the mountains. Our partners cannot lie to us, she said. Not in the language we share. They feel what is true and communicate what they feel. We learned to do the same, over generations, because the alternative was to be in a relationship with something honest and be dishonest yourself, and that is not a configuration that works. Kuramaru makes you honest. He makes me honest, she agreed. I have been known to make him stubborn, but that is a different conversation. Kuramaru, without opening his eyes, made a sound that managed to convey both agreement and mild objection. Naruto laughed, quietly, the genuine laugh that arrived when something caught him off guard in the best way. Tsum-san, he said, after the quiet had settled back in. Thank you for saying yes to this. To my coming. She looked at the stars for a moment. You earned the yes, she said. You spent a year earning it. That is how it works. With the Inuzuka. With me, she said, which was the more specific and more significant thing. The Inuzuka respect you because you have done the work and because you understand the difference between strength and trust. I trust you because, she paused, and the pause had the quality of something being decided in real time, because you see Hana clearly. She is not easy to see. She is not like me, she is quieter about what she is, and most people see the quiet and do not look further. She is remarkable, he said. Yes, some said. She is. And you know that not because someone told you but because you paid attention. She looked at him. That is why I trust you. He sat with this. That is the highest thing you have said to me, he said. Yes, she agreed. It is. The wind came off the ridge. Kuramaru pressed warmly against Sam's leg. The mountains were enormous and dark and entirely themselves around them, and the stars above the high camp were so many and so bright that the sky seemed to have more light than dark in it, and they sat in it together, the Hokage and the clan head and the great scarred dog who had made his person honest, and the night was extraordinary, and the world was very large and very good. Chapter 47, Kushina's Letter to Minato. Kushina Uzumaki wrote one letter in her life that she never intended anyone to read. She wrote it on a night in late August, at the small desk in her house that faced the window, in the same bold uneven hand that Naruto recognized from the letters in the wooden box, the hand that pressed hard into paper when there was something large in the person doing the pressing. She wrote it by lamplight, and she did not stop to reread as she went, and she wrote until she was finished, and then she folded it, and set it in the top drawer of the desk and put her pen down. She sat for a while after. The village was quiet outside the window. Autumn was 3 weeks away and the nights had begun to carry the first suggestion of it, the air losing its summer density, and taking on the early clarity of the turning season. A lamp was on in the house across the lane, behind a paper screen, and the shape of someone moving inside it was visible, and the ordinariness of it was a comfort, the village going about its ordinary private nighttime business. She took the letter out of the drawer. She read it. She had written to Minato about Naruto. About the specific person he had become, not the broad outlines of it but the texture, the way he walked through the village with full presence, the way he sat in kitchens and listened to old records being read aloud, the way he had opened the archive because it was the right thing and not the comfortable thing. The way he had come to Yoshino's kitchen on the New Year morning with the name still in his chest and sat at the table and accepted tea and did not perform anything. She had written, "He is yours in every way that matters." Not because he looks like you, though he does, and not because the mission classification systems would recognize it, but because the quality of his attention and the patience underneath his urgency, and the way he loves things past what is comfortable or convenient, those are yours. I know them. I have known them since I was 16 years old, and they were in your eyes when you looked at anything you cared about. They are in his. She had written, "I wish you could see him." I know that is an inadequate wish because it does not account for the specifics of what is and is not possible, and I have never been comfortable with inadequate wishes. But I am making it anyway because some things are true even when they are not possible. I see you in him every day. I want you to know that. Wherever this letter goes after I have written it, I want the record to exist that someone who knew you both has said, "He carries you perfectly." She folded the letter again. She sat for a while longer with it in her hands, and the lamp burned steadily, and the house across the lane went dark, and the village settled further into its night, and she held what she had written, which was true and which was a gift she was giving to the air rather than to any recipient, which was sometimes what gifts required. She got up. She made tea. She went to sit by the window. Tomorrow she would run the river path with Naruto, and he would tell her about the mountain assessment with the Inuzuka, and she would listen with the attention she gave to everything he told her, which was the full attention of someone who is both mother and witness, and has decided that both of those things are permanent, and wants to miss nothing. She looked at the lamp. She thought about the letter. She put it back in the drawer. Then she took it out again, and looked at it, and made a decision she had not consciously arrived at before the moment of making it. She would give it to him. Not immediately. Not as a managed occasion. But she would give it to him, because he deserved to know what she saw when she looked at him, and because Minato had deserved children who were told what they were worth, and this was the only way she had left to do that particular thing. She put the letter in a different place. A place she would remember when the time was right. She finished her tea. She went to bed. The village held her in its ordinary quiet, and the lamp on the desk burned down to nothing, and the night was full of its own continuations, and morning was coming, and she was, in the specific sense that had taken her a long time to arrive at, exactly where she was supposed to be. Chapter 48, Hitomi and the Second Garden. The Hyuga estate had several gardens. The formal one, the training one, and the small forgotten garden behind the old storage house that had no name, and that Hitomi had been going to for 30 years. What it did not have, until September, was a second nameless garden. The space behind the storage house had, over the course of the year, expanded its understanding of what it was. This had happened not through any planned intervention but through the accumulated presence of two people who came and went and occasionally brought things, a route redirected in the spring, a stone set right, and then, when the wisteria had finished its summer growth, a conversation about the long empty stretch of ground along the south fence that received good afternoon light but had nothing in it. Naruto had asked what she would put there, if she put anything. Hitomi had thought about it for 2 weeks. She had come back with an answer that was a list, written in the small precise hand she used for things that deserved precision, of plants that had specific meaning in the old Hyuga garden tradition, a tradition that predated the village alliance, and that had been largely set aside when the estate's gardening was formalized in the early village period. Folded into a more standardized approach that was visually coherent, but had lost the particular intentionality of the original. He had read the list. "These are all shade-tolerant," he said. "The south fence casts shade in the morning," she said. "The afternoon light is direct. Plants that can manage both are plants that can manage contradiction." He had looked at her with the look he had when something she said reached him beyond the immediate level, and she had received this without comment, which was how she received most of his reactions, noting them and continuing. They had planted the south border in September over 3 weekends, working in the early mornings before the heat, side by side on the turned earth with the smell of it rich and specific and the dew still on the existing plants in the garden. He had learned quickly how she worked in the garden, the sequence she preferred, the way she read the soil before placing anything in it, the questions she asked without asking them, the ones that required him to pay attention and answer by action rather than word. He was good at this. He was, she had concluded over months of observation, the kind of person who learned best by doing alongside, which was perhaps the most honest kind of learning because it did not allow for the gap between understanding and practice. On the third weekend, when the last of the plantings were in and they were standing back looking at the south border in its initial state, still young and sparse in the way new plantings were, requiring imagination to see what they would become, she said, "It needs a name." He looked at the border. "The whole garden needs a name," he said. "You told me it did not have one." "I told you what the state was, not that the state was correct," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "What would you call it?" She had been thinking about this. She had been thinking about it with more seriousness than she would have applied to the question 6 months ago, before the year had accumulated enough that certain questions felt differently weighted. "There is a word in the old Hyuga vocabulary," she said, before the clan formalized its language into the current standardized forms. "The word is nagori. It means the trace left by something that has passed. The mark of water on stone after the water has moved on. The impression in the grass after someone has sat. The resonance in a room after the sound has finished." She looked at the garden. "This garden has been here, unchanged, for 30 years, without my having put anything in it. It is itself a trace. It is what remained when the rest of the estate moved on." She paused. "And now it has new things in it, which will leave their own traces as they grow." He looked at her. "Nagori," he said. The word in his mouth had the quality of something he was learning in the real sense, taking it in rather than processing it. "Yes," she said. "Then that is its name," he said. "If you want it." She looked at the garden. She looked at the south border, where the new plantings were already, in the particular way of things that are growing in the right conditions, beginning to orient toward the afternoon light. "Yes," she said. "I want it." He nodded, and the naming settled over the garden the way names settled over things when they were right, not as a label from outside but as a recognition from within. And the garden which was Nagori held them both in its morning light, and the new plantings were green and small and certain of what they would become. Chapter 49. The letter May delivered in person. The diplomatic protocols of Kirigakure had, over May Terumi's tenure, become somewhat more flexible than they had been under her predecessor, who had conducted almost all high-level communications through formal written channels with the precise, studied distance of someone who believed that immediacy was a vulnerability. May had no objection to formal written channels. She used them extensively. She had also come to believe, through years of practice, that there were things that written channels did not fully accomplish, that required the particular medium of presence. This was why, on a Tuesday in early October that was not scheduled on any official calendar, May Terumi arrived at the Konoha gate without a delegation. She had 2 accompanying staff, which was the minimum that the Mizukage security protocol required and which was 5 fewer than any previous unscheduled visit. She had sent a message through the diplomatic channel the day before, not a formal notification but a personal message, to Naruto's office, that said, "I am coming tomorrow." Personal, not official. "I am aware this is irregular. I am doing it anyway." He had responded within an hour. "I will be available." She was shown to the Hokage's office by a young administrative assistant who was professional enough not to visibly register that the Mizukage had arrived without announcement on a non-summit day, which May appreciated. Naruto was at his desk when she came in, and he stood when she entered, and the office was the office she had been in before, with the window that looked over the village and the lamp on the desk and the various administrative evidence of a person who ran a village actively and in detail. "May-san," he said. "Naruto," she said, which was how she had been addressing him since the spring, the formal title having been set aside by mutual and unspoken agreement somewhere between the balcony conversation and the November monument morning. She sat in the chair he indicated and he came around from behind the desk and sat in the chair across from her rather than behind the desk, which she noted and which was characteristically him, the constant informal adjustment that refused the artificial distance of furniture arrangements. "You said personal," he said. Yes. Then tell me. She looked at him for a moment. She had organized this on the journey from Kiri, which was 6 hours, and had given her sufficient time to decide what she was going to say and how she was going to say it, and she had arrived at the decision to say it directly because indirection had never been her native language, and she had spent enough years watching people suffer from using it when they did not need to. I want to talk about what we are, she said. Not what the letters have been building toward. Not the coordinate system and the precision and the things that have been true and are getting truer. The actual thing. What it is, named clearly, so that we are not in the position of both knowing something and neither of us having said it. He was very still. Yes, he said. Not as deflection. As agreement with the necessity of the conversation. I have been thinking about you in a way that is not diplomatic, she said. Not the Mizukage thinking about the Hokage, though I also do that and it is genuinely valuable. I mean the person thinking about the person. She held his gaze with the directness that was the most essentially May thing about her, the willingness to look at what was real without softening it into something more comfortable. I think about your letters. I think about conversations. I think about the quality of your attention when you are actually listening to something, which is different from when you are politely listening, and I notice the difference because I am always in one mode or the other, and I recognize both. She paused. I think about November at the monument. I think about what you said about your father, and the way you said it. He said quietly, What do you think when you think about it? That I was glad to be there, she said. That being there with you in that specific moment was something I am glad happened. Not as Mizukage and Hokage at the landmark. As people. She paused. I have been careful for most of my adult life about the difference between what is personal and what is professional, because the position requires it, and because I understand why it requires it. I have been careful about this with you as well. I think I have been perhaps, another pause, the smaller one of choosing words, more careful than the situation currently warrants. He was quiet for a moment. Mei-san, he said. Yes. I have also been careful, he said. For similar reasons. And I have also been thinking that careful is perhaps not the right word anymore for what this is. He looked at her steadily. What would you like it to be? She looked at him. This was the question she had been organizing her answer to for the entire 6-hour journey, and she had the answer ready, and she gave it. I would like it to be honest, she said. I would like us to stop navigating around what is true and instead navigate from it. I would like the thing between us to have the quality that everything we do separately has, which is that it is real rather than managed. She paused. I am not asking you to solve anything or decide anything today. I am asking you to acknowledge what is true so that we can be honest about it going forward. He sat with this. What is true, he said slowly and completely, is that you are one of the most significant people in my life. Not because you are the Mizukage and the relationship is strategically important, though it is, but because you are Mei Terumi and the relationship with you specifically is something I think about and care about and do not want to be approximate about. Then we agree, she said. Then we agree, he confirmed. She felt something settle in her that had been unsettled for the better part of a year. The specific settling of a person who has said the real thing and had it received exactly as it was. Good, she said. Good, he agreed. She looked at the window, at the Konoha afternoon that was visible through it, the particular October quality of the light, golden and already carrying the angle of the approaching season. I would like to stay for a few days, she said. Unofficially. I have staff with me and we can be managed through the diplomatic residence without formal programming. Stay as long as you like, he said. I will stay a week, she said, which she had decided before she left Kiri and which she had not mentioned in the advance message because she had wanted to see his face when she said it. His face, when she said it, was exactly what she had hoped. A week, he said, and there was something in the way he said it that was simply and completely glad. A week, she confirmed. Outside the window, Konoha was golden in its October afternoon, and inside the Hokage's office 2 people sat in the good, honest clarity of something that had been real for a long time and had finally been given its right name. Chapter 50, The Accounting, Made Public. The formal public acknowledgement of the Uchiha clan's history was held in the Central Administrative Square on the 15th of October, a day that had been chosen by the council after consultation with Mikoto, who had indicated that a date in the autumn, when the trees in the square would be in their full color, was appropriate in a way she did not elaborate on, and did not need to. The square was full. This had not been required. The event had been announced through the standard village channels and attendance was voluntary, and there had been no particular emphasis placed on the importance of coming. The square was full anyway, because Konoha was a village that understood, when it needed to, what required witness. Naruto stood at the front of the square with the council arrayed behind him and Shikamaru to his left, and Mikoto to his right, which was not the official protocol for this kind of occasion but which was where she was supposed to be, and he had made it official by having her there. He spoke without notes. He had written the speech and revised it, and then, on the morning of the event, set it aside, because the speech in his mind was precise and complete, and required the specific quality of presence that notes interrupted. He trusted himself to know what needed to be said. He had been building toward knowing it for most of a year. He said, the Uchiha clan was the founding family of this village. Their history is our history. What happened to them was done in the name of the village's safety, by people who believed they were protecting something, and who were wrong in a way that is difficult to say clearly but that we owe it to the truth to say clearly. They were wrong. The protection of the village did not require what was done. It required something different, something harder, which was dialogue and trust and the willingness to treat the clan's legitimate concerns as what they were rather than what they feared they might become. He said the records show that the Uchiha clan raised those concerns through the correct channels, repeatedly, over years. The records show that those concerns were received and not adequately addressed. The records show that there were people within the village's governance who advocated for the right approach and were not heard. All of this is now part of the public record because it belongs there. He said, Mikoto Uchiha is the last senior member of a clan that this village failed. She is here. She has chosen to be here and to be part of this village's future, and that choice is not something I take for granted and not something I will ever stop being grateful for. He said, the acknowledgement we make today is not the end of anything. It is the beginning of the accountability that was owed and that this village is now taking on. The Uchiha archive is open. The records are public. The clan's history is the village's history, and we will teach it as such, honestly and completely, beginning this year in the academy curriculum. He said, I want to say one more thing. The document that matters most in the archive is not the correspondence that shows what went wrong. It is a letter, written 8 years before the massacre, by a member of this village's council, advocating through proper channels for the right thing. That person was not heard. Their letter survived. I want that letter understood as what it is, which is proof that the right understanding existed in this village, that it was present, that it was spoken. The failure was not one of collective knowledge but of collective courage, and the difference matters. We know this now. We do something with that knowing. He stopped speaking. The square was quiet in the way large gatherings are quiet when everyone in them is doing something real rather than waiting for the event to be over. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, a sound began. Not applause. Something slower and more serious, the village making the sound it made when it was acknowledging something at the level at which this needed to be acknowledged. Mikoto stood beside him and did not move. Her face was composed with the composure that was genuinely hers, not the management of feeling but the dignity of someone who has come a very long way to stand in this specific place and is standing in it fully. He glanced at her. She was looking at the square, at all the people in it, at the trees in their October color, and the sky above them which was the clear pale blue of a Konoha autumn morning. Is this what you needed? He asked quietly, so that only she could hear. She was quiet for a moment. It is what was owed, she said. What I needed and what was owed are, in this case, the same thing. He nodded. The sound from the crowd continued for a while, and then it settled, and the square began to move in the way of gatherings that have done what they came to do, and the October morning held everything in its particular, honest light. Chapter 51. Biwako's last evening on the wall. She had known, in the way she had known most things for the last several years, with the quiet certainty of a person who has accumulated enough life to read its later chapters with accuracy, that the evenings on the wall were finite. Not in the abstract sense in which all things are finite. In the more specific sense of someone who has been in conversation with her own body long enough to know what its signals mean. She did not tell anyone this. She sat on the wall on the last evening of October, which had turned cold in the way October evenings turned cold when they meant it, the cold with clarity rather than dampness, the cold that made the stars very present and the air taste of stone and bare branches and the particular mineral quality of deep autumn. She had brought her coat, which she had not bothered with in September, and she had brought the small flat stone from her keeping box, which she held in her palm without entirely knowing why, only that it felt like the right thing to have in her hand on this particular evening. She heard him coming from 2 streets away. She knew the step. He came around the corner and saw her and came to the wall, and he sat, and the warmth of him beside her in the cold was the comfortable warmth of someone who has sat here enough times that the proximity was simply part of the configuration. Cold tonight, he said. Yes, she said. Properly. They looked at the lane. A few lights and windows. The sound of something cooking from a nearby house. The smell of wood smoke, which was the specific smell of the village in deep autumn, the whole place settling into its warm interiors and letting the outside be cold. Biwako-san, he said after a while. How are you? It was a question he asked with real intent when he asked it, not as greeting but as inquiry. She had observed this from the first, and had always answered it accordingly. Old, she said. Honestly and completely old, in the way that is not metaphor. The body has opinions about stairs and cold and the hour at which sleep becomes necessary that it did not have 20 years ago. She looked at the lane. But the mind is good. The mind is better than it has ever been, actually, which is the trade the very old are sometimes offered. The body in exchange for a clarity of perception that was not available earlier. I have accepted the trade. Is it a good trade? For me, yes. I have always lived more in the mind than the body. The terms favor me. He was quiet. You are worried about me, she said. Yes, he said without deflecting it. That is kind, she said. And appropriate. And I want you to know that I am not afraid. I have had a long life and a good one, and the goodness has increased in the later period, which is not a common outcome, and which I am aware is rare and which I am grateful for. She paused. The last year has been among the best of all of it. I want you to know that I know that and that you are part of why it is true. He could not speak for a moment. She looked at the stone in her palm. She held it out to him. From the keeping box, she said. A piece of this wall. I put it in last spring and I want you to have it now, while I am in a position to give it to you with full intention. He looked at the stone. He looked at her. Biwako-san, he said. Take it, she said. I have the memory. You should have the object. He took it. He held it in the same way she had held it, feeling its weight, which was the weight of all the evenings the wall had held them. I will come tomorrow, he said. I know you will, she said. And the evening after. Yes. For as long as there are evenings. She looked at him, and the brightness in her eyes was at its fullest, that precision and that warmth that was entirely Biwako Sarutobi, and that no one who had ever received it had been able to fully describe. That is the right thing to say, she said. They sat on the wall while the cold settled further into the lane and the stars came out above the bare branches and the village was warm in all its lit windows around them, and neither of them was anywhere else, and neither of them needed to be, and the stone was in his palm, and it was enough, and it was the right kind of enough, the kind that does not apologize for being finite because the finite is where all the real things live. Chapter 52, Mito and the Completed Song. The first Yuzushio Midsummer Song was finished in November. Mito had been working on it, in the slow and meticulous way she worked on all of the reconstruction projects, for 2 years. What she had at the beginning was a melody she carried in memory that was reliable, the melody being the part of music that the body holds most durably, and fragments of the text, some of which were certain and some of which were approximations, reconstructed from context and from the other songs in the tradition and from the principle, which she had developed through the work. That the songs had an internal logic that constrained what they could have said even where the specific words were no longer recoverable. The song was about the sea returning. It was the midsummer song because midsummer was when, in the Yuzushio tradition, the community gathered to acknowledge that the difficult season was behind them and the full season was here, that what had been survived was survived and what was ahead could be faced. The sea returning was the specific image for this, the tide that had gone out and the empty shore and the moment when the water came back, and what it brought with it, and how you stood on the shore and received it. She sang it for the first time, in its completed form, on a Sunday afternoon in November in her kitchen, which was where she sang things when she sang them, because the kitchen was the room she had made most fully hers and because singing required the particular warmth of a room you were comfortable in. Naruto was at the table. He had been coming every Sunday for most of the year, and he was part of the kitchen's Sunday character now, the person at the table with his tea who listened and occasionally stirred and who was, she had come to understand, her most important witness, not because he had any technical expertise in Uzumaki music but because he received what she gave him with the full and specific attention that meant it was truly received. She sang the song from beginning to end without stopping. When she finished she stood at the stove with her back to him, looking at the pot that was not currently requiring her attention, giving him a moment she did not need to give him but chose to because she understood that people needed space after true things. After a while he said, "Play it again." She turned to look at him. His face had the open quality that true things produced in him. His eyes were bright in the way they were when something reached a deeper register. "Please," he said. She sang it again. This time he listened with his eyes closed and his hands flat on the table in the posture she had come to recognize as his full body listening, the physical practice of receiving something with the whole self rather than only the ears. When she finished the second time the kitchen was very quiet. "The part in the middle," he said, "where the melody drops. Is that intentional?" "Yes. It is the moment of the empty shore. The tide out, the waiting. The melody drops because the song is in the waiting. And then it comes back." "Yes. Higher than before. The tide returns above the previous waterline." He opened his eyes. "Mito-san," he said. "Yes. You have done something extraordinary." "I have recovered something that was lost," she said. "The extraordinary part was done by the people who made it." "Both things can be true," he said. She looked at him. "Both things can be true," she agreed. She sat down across from him and poured them both fresh tea, and the kitchen was warm and smelled of everything she had been cooking, and the November afternoon outside the window was pale and clear. "I want to teach it," she said. "The song. The other Uzumaki in the village, and then further. The diaspora communities. I have been in correspondence with 3 of them. They have their own fragments, different versions of some of the same songs, and if we share what we have we will recover more than any of us has alone. I will support that however you need," he said. "Resources, introductions, diplomatic facilitation if any of the diaspora communities are in territories that require it." "Yes to all of those," she said. "I am also going to need," she paused, and there was something in the pause that was different from her usual pauses. A slight hesitation that was not uncertainty but rather the careful stepping over something she was not used to stepping over. "I am going to need help. Not administrative help. Personal help. Someone to sit in on the reconstruction sessions and ask the questions that I cannot ask myself because I am too close to the material." "Me," he said. "Yes," she said. "If you are willing to continue." "Mito-san," he said, and there was something in his voice that was both gentle and entirely serious. "I will not stop coming on Sundays." She looked at him for a moment. "Good," she said. "Good," he agreed. The song existed now in the world, complete and true and ready to be given to whoever needed it, and the kitchen held its Sunday warmth, and the tea was good, and outside the window the November afternoon was clear and cold and full of the particular beauty of a season that has arrived at what it is with nothing held back. Chapter 53, The Second New Year. The second New Year came in the way the first one had, with the ceremony in the cold pre-dawn and the names and the ceremonial fire in the central square, all the things that were the same every year and that were the same because they were supposed to be, because the continuity was the point. What was different was everything else. He still walked to the ceremony alone through the cold pre-dawn streets, because the walk was part of it, the time it gave him to carry the weight of what was coming and to be with it before the public part of the morning required him to be the Hokage rather than the person who was doing the Hokage thing. The streets were quiet and cold and familiar in the way of routes walked often enough that they are known in the body. He still read the names in the grey pre-dawn silence. There were 3 this year. 3 fewer than the year before. The distance from the war continued to grow, but after the ceremony, when the formal obligations had released him into the hour between the observance and the day, he did not walk alone. He walked with Kushina, who had been at the ceremony, standing in the crowd where the ceremony allowed spectators, in the red coat she wore in the cold months that was the most vivid thing in any crowd she was part of. She had come to stand beside him when the ceremony concluded, and they had walked together through the streets that were beginning to come awake around them. They arrived at Yoshino's door together. Yoshino answered, and looked at both of them, and something moved in her expression that was the specific response of a person who has planned for possibilities and found that the possibilities she planned for were more richly various than the planning accounted for. "Come in," she said. "I will make more tea." The kitchen was warm. The sesame rice cakes were there as they had been the year before. There was also, because Yoshino planned for possibilities, a second plate of food, the uzumaki winter bread that Mito had taught her to make, and that was now a regular exchange between their households, the recipes moving back and forth in the way that the best things moved between people who had decided that what one knew was improved by being shared. Kushina sat at Yoshino's kitchen table with the ease of someone who had been to this kitchen before, which she had, twice in the autumn, for reasons that had felt organic and had become so. Naruto sat in his chair, the one that was his now in the way that chairs become someone's. The three of them drank tea in the kitchen of the New Year's first morning, and the names were still in Naruto's chest, and Yoshino was precise and warm and exactly herself, and Kushina was vivid and present, and exactly herself, and the kitchen held all of it, and outside the window the new year was arriving in its full light. After a while Yoshino said, "Mikoto will be at the records hall at 9. She and I are beginning the formal incorporation of the Uchiha archive materials into the main catalog today." "I know," Naruto said. "I will be there at 10. Mei-san arrives on the 6th, Kushina said. She said it with the particular tone of someone who has decided to know everyone's schedule because it is useful and because she is interested. "For the winter trade review." "The 5th, actually," Naruto said. She adjusted the departure date. Kushina looked at him. "The 5th. She wanted an extra day." Kushina's expression did a thing that was entirely Kushina, a flash of something that was amusement, and understanding and approval all compressed into a single look, and then she picked up her tea and drank it. "Good," she said. "Good," he agreed. Yoshino, who had been listening to this exchange with the quality of attention she applied to things that were interesting and that did not require her comment, poured more tea all around. The morning opened. The village outside began its new year. The three of them sat in the kitchen and ate the sesame cakes and the uzumaki winter bread and talked about the catalog and the archive and the spring training schedule and the river path and nothing in particular, and everything important, and the kitchen was warm, and the tea was right, and the year began the way the best things began, quietly and completely. With the people who constituted the center gathered in one room and the world outside going on in all its complicated, living, generative beauty. Chapter 54 Spring, again, and what it means now. The second spring was different from the first one in the way that second springs are always different, not in what happens, which is the same, the wisteria and the cherry trees and the Nagarahana running high with snow melt and the training grounds moving from their winter configuration to their spring one, but in what you bring to it, which changes everything. Naruto walked the village on a morning in the second spring, on a route he did not plan, just moving through it the way he moved through it now, with a full presence that had become his natural mode rather than something he had to choose. The market district and the residential streets and the lane where Biwako's wall was. He stopped at the wall. He put his hand on the stone of it. Biwako had died in February, quietly, in her own bed, in the manner she would have chosen if the manner of such things were available for choosing. Konoha had marked it with the fullness it deserved, and Naruto had stood at the ceremony in the central square and said the things that needed to be said with the full honesty she had always demanded from him and that he had learned, in part from her, to demand from himself. He stood at the wall with his hand on the cold stone of it. He thought about what she had said, that the significant things in a life are its textures. The evenings on the wall. The conversations that did not lead anywhere except toward the next conversation. The presence of people who show up. He thought about the stone in his pocket, which was where he kept it, the flat stone from the keeping box that she had put in his palm on the last October evening. He took it out and held it, and then put it back. He walked on. He walked to the records hall, where Yoshino was already at her desk, because she was always already at her desk, and where the Uchiha archive materials were being incorporated into the main catalog in the careful, ongoing way of a project that was not hurry because it was too important to hurry. He made tea in the back room the way he did when he arrived before Yoshino had gotten to it, which was sometimes, and set her cup at her elbow, and she said thank you without looking up, and he sat at the work table with the surveyed document he had been reviewing for the Boundary Commission, and the morning proceeded in its good and specific way. He walked later to Mito's house, where the Sunday sessions had extended to include Wednesday mornings now that the song reconstruction project had moved into its next phase, the diaspora correspondence that was bringing in fragments from 3 different communities and that required more sessions to process. The songs were accumulating. Each recovered piece was different from but related to the others, and the picture of what Yuzashio's musical tradition had been was becoming more complete and more extraordinary with each edition. He walked to the Inuzuka training grounds and ran the morning circuit with Hana, who was, now that they had been running together for half a year, someone he had come to know with the specific clarity of people you spend regular physical time with, whose character is visible in how they move and breathe and choose to manage difficulty. He walked in the afternoon to the Nagori garden, where the south border plantings were in their second spring, taller and more established, the shade-tolerant varieties that managed contradiction having done exactly what Hitomi had predicted, and where she was already there, in the unhurried attentive mode she was in when she was with the garden, which was one of the versions of her he liked best. They checked the plantings together. The wisteria was doing its annual extraordinary thing. The east wall stood in its repaired configuration, the geological conversation between old stones and new ones undisturbed by winter. The north face, she said. Yes, he said. When are you ready? A month, she said. I want to see how the spring moisture affects the existing section before we decide the approach. A month, he agreed. They stood in the garden in the spring afternoon, and the wisteria moved overhead in the light wind, and the garden was being what Hitomi had allowed it to be, which was itself, which was, in the end, the most that any garden or any place or any person could be asked for. He walked home in the evening along the river path, which was the route he walked home along when he was not in a hurry and had the time to be with the river and the willows and the sound of water that has been moving over the same stones for a very long time. May was there. Not on the path. At the flat stone at the bend, the one that had been Kushina's place and was now, in the expanded understanding of the year's second spring, available to whoever came to it. She was sitting with her feet on the stone, not in the water because the snow melt made it genuinely cold, just on the stone, watching the current. She heard him on the path. She always heard him. You are late, she said. I was in the Nagori garden with Hitomi-san, he said. We checked the spring growth. And the wisteria is doing its excessive thing again, he said, and the south border plantings have survived the winter beautifully. And the east wall is holding perfectly, and we are going to look at the north face in a month. Good, she said. He came and sat beside her on the stone, close, in the way that was the natural configuration of people who have decided that the distance they were keeping was no longer required. The river ran fast with snowmelt, clear and cold, and the willows were in their early spring haze, the particular green that was almost gold, and the evening light was the long gold of a spring evening that had decided to be generous with its time. Are you happy? She asked. He sat with the question. He gave it the honesty it deserved. Yes, he said. I am. He looked at the river. Not in the way I thought it would feel, when I was young and thought about being happy. I thought it would feel like winning something. Like arriving at a destination. He paused. It feels like this. Like being on the right path, moving in the right direction, with the right people alongside. She looked at the river. Yes, she said. That is exactly what it feels like. The river moved past them in the evening light and the willows moved overhead, and somewhere upstream a heron was doing what herons do, standing in the shallows with its compressed intention and its patience that was not patience but readiness. And the spring evening was long and golden, and Konoha was in all its directions around them. And Mei Terumi sat beside Naruto Uzumaki at the bend in the Flower River, and they were in the right place moving in the right direction, and the current carried everything it needed to carry northward, and the light was extraordinary, and it was enough. Chapter 55. Everything the village knows. There was a thing that Konoha knew that it had taken a long time to articulate, Not because the knowing was unclear, but because the thing known was the kind of thing that resists articulation, that lives more accurately in the accumulated texture of daily experience than in any statement of it. Konoha knew its Hokage. Not the Hokage as title. Not the Hokage as function, though the village had every reason to trust the function, which had been exercised with consistent competence and genuine care across the years of this tenure. It knew him as the person who walked its market streets on Tuesday mornings and remembered every face. The person who sat on rooftops in the early morning and tasted the different quality of the air at altitude. The person who brought takeout to archivists and read footnotes aloud and ran river paths at evening and sat on low walls with elders and opened archive rooms that had been closed for too long and made the right calls with the particular combination of patience and courage that the right calls always required. It knew him in the way communities know the people who constitute them when those people are fully present in the life of the place. Not as a legend, though the legend was there too, available when needed and honored when appropriate. As a neighbor. As the person you could see, if you looked, on most mornings, somewhere in the village, moving through it with the quality of someone who had decided a long time ago that being here was the thing, not as a position or a duty but as a life. The village knew the people around him too, in the way that the people around a genuine center become known through their relationship to it, and through themselves. It knew Yoshino Nara, who ran the records hall with exact precision and had produced, over the past year, more significant archaeological recoveries than the hall had managed in the previous decade, and who was known to occasionally be visited on Tuesday mornings by the Hokage with Ichiraku takeout, and to occasionally visit the Hokage's office with findings that required his direct attention and to have, for reasons the village did not analyze but noted with approval, a look in her eyes when she spoke of him that was the look of someone who has invested in something and is watching it bear fruit. It knew Mikoto Uchiha, who sat now as the formally recognized Uchiha clan representative in the expanded council structure and who brought to every session the specific combination of institutional memory, historical depth, and the particular quality of someone who had survived extraordinary things and had chosen to be present anyway. She was known in the village as formidable, which was the right word, and as someone who walked the market district on Thursday mornings sometimes and stopped to look at the ceramics studio near the Eastern Market with an expression that was private and that the village had the good manners not to press. It knew Tsuminizuka, who was Tsuminizuka and had always been known and whose contribution to the expanded joint training protocol was already showing results in the graduating genin cohort that the mission assignment records were beginning to reflect. And whose daughter Hana was becoming someone in her own right whose assessment of the Hokage's character had settled into the specific Inuzuka register that meant she had found him genuine, and was proceeding accordingly. It knew Hitomi Hyuga, who taught at the academy on Thursday afternoons and whose students showed, in their early mission assessments, an unusual capacity for situational awareness that their instructors attributed to her teaching and that she attributed, in her characteristically direct way, to her students' willingness to be wrong about what they were seeing long enough to see it correctly. It knew Mito Uzumaki, who was in regular correspondence with diaspora communities in 4 different lands and who was making, from her kitchen and her archive and her memory, one of the most significant contributions to cultural preservation that the village had seen in its history, and whose Sunday afternoons were, the village understood without being told, something the Hokage organized his week around. It knew Meitarumi, who was not Konoha's and who remained Kiri's and who was nonetheless present in the village with a frequency and a quality of presence that the village had noticed and had decided, without editorial, to simply be glad of. Because she was someone who made the room she was in more fully itself and because the Hokage when she was in Konoha had a quality of ease that he also had at other times, but that was more fully present when she was there. And it knew Kushina, who was the most visible and the most quietly extraordinary of all of them, who had arrived in Konoha through circumstances that defied conventional understanding and had decided, with the stubbornness that was the deepest Uzumaki trait, to be fully here, to run the river path in the mornings and cook in her kitchen and tell the names of the people of Uzushio to anyone who would hear them and to be, in all the ways that mattered, his mother. The village knew all of this and held all of it in the accumulated, non-verbal, entirely real way that communities hold what is true about themselves. And what the village knew, at the depth where knowing becomes belief and belief becomes the material the future is made from, was this: that the boy who had grown up in its streets unloved and unreceived and who had chosen, against all reasonable expectation, to love it anyway, had become the person it needed and had found, in the process of becoming that person, the people who made the center hold. And the center was holding. And the village was alive in all its directions, difficult and beautiful and ongoing. And the river ran through it, and the cherry trees did their annual extraordinary thing, and the lanterns went up at midsummer, and the names were read at the New Year, and the archive was open, and the songs were being recovered, and the walls were being repaired, and the roots were being redirected toward the space that had been made for them. And in the middle of all of it, the seventh Hokage moved through his village with full presence and no walls, a whirlpool that did not drown, a center that was responsive rather than fixed, holding without closing, and the people who constituted his coordinates moved alongside him and around him and toward him, and the village that had once not known what to do with him had become, over the long patient work of years, a place that knew exactly what it had. Chapter 56. The letter Kushina gave him. She gave it to him on a morning in late spring, when the cherry trees had been and gone and the wisteria was at its height, and the village was in the particular fullness of the season between spring's announcement and summer's declaration, the weeks when everything was its most completely itself. She gave it to him at the river path, at the flat stone, which was where they came together most mornings now, the running finished and the stone warm from the sun and the river lower now, moving with the leisurely confidence of a waterway that has made its peace with the season. She took it from the pocket of her coat and held it out. He looked at it. He knew the handwriting. He knew it the way he knew all the things that were continuous in his life, with the body rather than the mind. Read it later, she said. Not now. When you are alone and it is quiet. He put it in his own pocket. What is it? He asked. She looked at the river. A letter I wrote in August, she said. To your father. About you. She paused. I was going to keep it. And then I decided he deserved to have it said to someone who was present, and you are the closest thing I have to him, in the ways that matter, and so I decided you should have it instead. He sat with this for a long moment. Mom, he said. Yes, she said. Thank you. Read it tonight, she said. Not at the office. At home, when it is quiet. I will. She looked at the river for a while. He sat beside her on the stone and did not speak. Because the moment did not need speech, it needed the quality of being in it fully, which was what he knew how to do. After a while she said, he would have liked them. All of them. Yoshino-san? Especially Yoshino-san, Kushina said. He appreciated that particular kind of precision. And Biwako, though they knew each other slightly. He would have known her better if he had had the time. She paused. Mikoto he knew. He cared about her. He would be glad she is here. Another pause. Mei-san he would have found fascinating and possibly slightly intimidating, which I find gratifying. Naruto made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was in the family of laughs. Mito-san he would have sat with for hours, she continued. The sealing tradition and the Uzushio history. He would not have stopped asking questions. She smiled, the real one that was entirely about the memory. He was like you in that way. The not stopping asking questions. And Hitomi-san? Kushina was quiet for a moment. He would have understood her immediately. The kind of strength that is precise and doesn't perform itself. He had enormous respect for that kind of strength. And Tsum-san? He was a little afraid of Tsum, Kushina said, with the absolute certainty of someone reporting a fact. He would never have admitted it. But she had a way of looking at people that assessed them very completely and very quickly, and he was always slightly on edge around it. He respected her enormously, she added, and he would have been glad you and she have what you have. He would have understood its value immediately. Naruto looked at the river. He would have been good at this, he said. The Hokage thing. Yes, she said. He was. For the time he had. He left it to me in the best possible condition, Naruto said. Considering what he was working with. Considering how young he was. He left it to you, Kushina said quietly, because he trusted you. Before you were born. With full knowledge that you would not know for years that you were carrying it. She looked at him. That is the specific kind of trust that does not require evidence. He had it. He was right to have it. The river moved past them in the spring morning. A pair of ducks went through the bend with the purposeful efficiency of creatures who know exactly where they are going. The willows above them were in full leaf now, the pale gold of spring having deepened into the certain green of summer approaching. "Read the letter tonight," she said again. "I will," he said. He did. He read it at home, in the kitchen, with the glass door to the garden open and the spring evening air coming in, sitting at the small table with the letter on it, and the lamp beside him and the garden visible in the last light. He read it once quickly. He read it again slowly. He sat with it for a long time after the second reading, looking at the garden and thinking about the specific sentence in which she had written that he carried his father perfectly, and the specific sentence in which she had written that the love had been there before he arrived, organizing everything around itself in the dark, before there was anything yet to love, waiting for him. He folded the letter very carefully. He put it in the wooden box, with the 41 letters that had always been there. He closed the latch. He went and stood at the open glass door and looked at the garden in the last of the spring evening light, and the jasmine that had been planted along the south wall was beginning its season, and the stone path through the center was catching the last light, and somewhere in the village the evening's first lamp was going on in a kitchen window, and then another, and then several more, the village lighting itself for the evening in its customary way. Window by window, the whole of it becoming its own constellation against the darkening sky. He stood there for a long time. He was not watching any doors. He was in his house in his village in the spring evening with 42 letters in a wooden box and a stone from a lane wall in his pocket, and the name Nagori for a garden and the melody of a recovered song in his memory and the sensation of a hand against his face, and the word mom and the word home and everything that had been built in the long, patient, real work of a life that had chosen, at its deepest level, to remain open. He went back inside. He made tea. He sat at the table and looked at the garden and felt the full, unguarded, completely actual weight of the life he was living, which was the best weight there was, the weight that meant something, the weight of what had been built and was still being built and would continue to be built, stone by patient stone, conversation by conversation, morning by morning, by people who had found each other and decided, without ceremony or announcement, to remain. Chapter 57, The Seventh Hokage. On an ordinary morning. The morning was ordinary. This was, as Naruto had come to understand over the years, the highest thing a morning could be. Not the morning of a ceremony or a summit or a significant event, the mornings that history recorded and that people talked about afterward. The morning that was simply itself, that required nothing particular and offered everything available, that was the groundwork all the other mornings were built on. He was up before the village, as he usually was. He made tea. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the garden, which was in its early summer configuration, the jasmine on the south wall coming into its full season and the stone path damp from the night's dew and the light coming in at the low, specific angle of a morning that had not yet decided what it was going to be. He thought, without forcing it, about the day. He had a morning briefing at 9 that Shikamaru had organized and that would cover 3 items, none of them urgent, all of them real. He had a session with the Boundary Commission at 11 that would close out the Eastern Territory question that had been ongoing since autumn and that had arrived, through the specific structure of the water agreement that Yoshino's 3 questions had pointed him toward, at a resolution that everyone involved had said was better than what they had come in hoping for. In the afternoon he had the academy observation that Hitomi had asked him to attend, where she was running the triangulation exercise with the third-year students and wanted his particular outside perspective, the one that was not that of someone trained in the Hyuga method and was therefore useful for catching what her method's assumptions prevented her from seeing. In the evening he was having dinner with Kushina and Mito, which had been Mito's idea, the two of them having found, over the course of the autumn and winter, a friendship that was its own thing rather than a function of their shared connection to him. Grounded in their Uzumaki histories and the reconstruction work and the particular recognition of 2 women who had both been singular in their own lives and who found in each other someone who did not require explanation. The dinner would be at Mito's house, which meant the food would be extraordinary and the kitchen would smell of things that were ancient and particular and real, and there would be a moment at some point in the evening when one of them would start telling a story about Yuzashio that the other would know a different version of. And the comparison of versions would go on for longer than stories usually went on because either of them was willing to let a true thing be approximate. He was glad of all of it. He finished his tea. He went to the garden. He walked the stone path in the early morning dew, which was a thing he did some mornings without particular intention, just moving through the space he had been given in the specific way that made the space his, which was by being in it with full attention. The jasmine was opening. He stopped and looked at it. It had been planted along the south wall by the previous resident of the house, which meant it was already established when he came and had been doing this every summer without him, and he had not noticed it until the second year when it bloomed and the smell came through the glass door and made the kitchen briefly something different from itself, something older and more fragrant. He thought about Mito and the songs. About the sea returning. About the tide that goes out and the shore that waits and the moment when the water comes back, above the previous waterline. He thought about Biwako and the stone in his pocket, and the brightness in her eyes and the keeping box and the specific gift of the late life that had been offered to her, and that she had accepted with the lack of sentimentality, and the full presence that was entirely her. He thought about Yoshino in the early morning light of the new year, saying almost nothing, providing everything. He thought about Sam in the mountains under the extraordinary stars, saying, "You earned the yes." He thought about Hitomi in the garden with her hand tracing the path the root should take and her voice saying, "The same things that give most living things a reason to prefer a direction." He thought about Makoto in the archive room with the records of her sons in her hands and the composure that held and the name she had used, just the name, without any form of address. He thought about Kushina at the river in the autumn evening saying, "I am for those places," and later, on the path in spring, handing him a letter that was addressed to someone who could not receive it, and that she had given to him instead because he was the closest thing. He thought about May, at the October window, saying "we agree," and meaning it in the full and precise way she meant all things she chose to say, and the week she had stayed, which had been a week of ordinary things made extraordinary by the quality of being in them with the right person. He thought about all of them. The garden was quiet around him. The morning was becoming itself in the particular way mornings did, the light strengthening and the dew beginning to lift, and the first sounds of the village arriving from the streets beyond the wall. He was the seventh Hokage. He was a person who had learned, over the course of a year that was still continuing and would continue, to receive what was offered with the same fullness that he had always given. He was a person who had stopped watching the door and discovered that the thing he had been afraid to lose was not going anywhere. He was a person who stood in an early summer garden with 42 letters in a wooden box inside and a stone from a lane wall in his pocket, and the melody of a recovered song available to him, and the word Nagori, and the word home and the particular, specific, daily evidence that the center was holding. He was a person who loved his village and was loved by it, and who moved through both of those facts with the full presence of someone who understands that love is a practice and a choice and a continuous act of attention, and not a state that, once arrived at, requires nothing further. The jasmine was very fragrant in the early morning. He stood in the garden and let the morning be ordinary, which was the same as letting it be everything, and the village began its day around him, and the river ran along its eastern boundary carrying its cargo of early summer light northward, and the coordinates of his life were each in their own part of the world beginning their own mornings. And the bond between them and him and all of them together was not a thread that could fray but a structure that had been built with care, and that was holding and would hold and was still, every morning, being built. He went inside. He got ready for the day. He walked out his front door into the morning of his village, and it received him the way it always did, completely and without condition, and he received it in return. And the ordinary day opened before them both, and everything that had been built was present in it, and everything that was still being built was also present, and the light was extraordinary, and the jasmine was fragrant, and the morning was ordinary. Which was the highest thing a morning could be. It was enough. It was, in fact, everything.